Disclaimer. The following content is entirely fictional and does not represent real events or people. This material has been edited and adapted from the channel Beyond the Page. My body slumped deeper against the car seat as I stared out the window of my father's old truck. The music blasted in my ears from my iPod as I took in a deep breath, awaiting the new life that was ahead of me. My name is Rochelle James, and I am currently 16 and a senior in high school. I know what you're thinking. How can a young girl like me be a senior this year? Well, if some of you have not guessed it already, I am a total nerd. And no, I do not have dorky glasses and a face infested with horrible acne, thank goodness. I am simply your typical teenage girl with long, wavy, dark brown hair up to my mid-back and hazel green eyes. My body isn't too skinny nor too fat. It's just right in my eyes. Anyway, I know what you guys are still thinking. A 16-year-old senior. Well, it's a long story, which pretty much ties into the situation I am currently in. My mom had passed away when I was fairly young, and my dad pretty much had a total meltdown. Luckily for me, it wasn't one of those get drunk every single night and beat up his 10-year-old daughter every morning when he came home from who knows where thing. It was practically an isolation type of thing where he would work extra shifts, and if he had a day off, he would either spend it out at the lake nearby or locked up in his bedroom. Seeing as I had so much time on my hands, I had no other choice but to learn how to do things on my own. I learned how to cook, clean, and dress myself with no needed assistance from a parent. I learned how to take the bus to go to school, since my dad would leave in the early hours of the morning and wouldn't be back until later that night. After learning how to be more independent for my better being, I had decided to take higher level classes, since I wasn't much of a social person, nor was I athletic in any way, shape or form. I would always do my homework on time, no procrastinator here, and work my butt off in order to receive, as with almost every single assignment I would turn in. Which is why I am 16 and almost graduating this year from high school. Oh wait. I almost forgot to mention the fact as to why I'm in the car, with my dad and a whole mess of luggage in the back of the truck. Well, as I have already mentioned, my mom had passed away when I was only 10 years old, and my dad went into depression mode. After hating the fact of coming home to a house that held too many memories of a person that would never again walk through the front door, my dad had decided to move from our cozy, a country home in Texas to a busy city neighborhood in Chicago. I can't really say that I hated the place, but I was never too fond of city environments, especially not the people there. I mean, I loved the fact that my classes were always filled with such diverse people and I was able to learn more about different cultures and sports. Definitely sports. But the people there were just plain rude. Luckily for me, my dad didn't like that place much either. So, here I am, traveling to my new home in Black Forest, Colorado. It wasn't exactly the country lifestyle that I have grown to love ever since the day I was brought into this world. But at least it wasn't the city. As my dad swerved the car through the narrow road that was surrounded by trees, I couldn't help but look at him from the passenger seat. He had the same shade of hair as I did, but with light brown eyes instead of my hazel green ones. His face had aged a bit. Not because of the years that have gone by, but due to the stress he had to endure from losing his beloved. And yet, here he was with a bright smile on his face as he looked down at me. "You okay there, kiddo?" he asked, ruffling my hair a bit, which was a habit that I hated whenever he called me by my childhood nickname. I glared at him playfully through my messed up hair that now covered my face and blew it away, only to have it land softly in its previous place. I straightened my stance as I began to fix my hair, brushing my fingers through it to get rid of the newfound knots that he created. Once satisfied with the outcome, I looked back at him and smiled. Yeah. I'm fine. He returned the smile and turned back to the road ahead of him. So how do you think your new school will be like? I shrugged my shoulders, removing my earphones as I placed them on my lap and switched off my iPod in the middle of a song. Oh. I don't know. The usual, I guess. Books. Lockers. Teachers. People. I said sarcastically, trying to hold back a smile as I noticed the look he gave me from the corner of my eye. He rolled his eyes dramatically, letting out a playful sigh as he gently nudged me on the shoulder. Haha. Very funny. But I'm serious, Rocky. Are you nervous about going to another new school? As he spoke those words, I couldn't help but look at him with sadness. He knew very well how much I hated going to new places. But I knew he never did it on purpose. We had moved a few times within the state after we had left our original home. And after doing so countless of times, I had grown accustomed to him randomly saying that we were moving to a new home or apartment. He never really did quite realize how much I dreaded the whole moving thing. Until now, I guess. I let out a distressed sigh as I gave him the most reassuring smile I could muster. I am nervous. But that's what makes it an adventure. Right. He smiled weakly, obviously catching the fact that I was trying to lighten up the mood, with little to no success. He didn't say anything else after that, and I was left with my own thoughts as I stared out at the trees that passed by. My gosh! How many trees can one city hold? As I continued to stare at them and imagine myself running through them at an inhuman pace, I've always done that since I was a little girl. I couldn't help but notice a dark figure running at the same speed my dad was allowing the truck to go. I squinted my eyes slightly, trying to get a better view of it. But the second I had seen it, it was gone. I rubbed my eyes to check if I was hallucinating before I rolled down the window and stuck my head out. I looked back behind the truck to see if I was able to spot anything. It was quite difficult if you asked me, since my long hair kept on getting in the way from the harsh winds that were now being blown harshly against my head. With a swift movement of my hand, I collected my hair and held it over my shoulder as I stared down the road. Huh. Nothing. Just when I was about to move back inside, I noticed a dark figure in the corner of my eye emerge from the trees. I immediately looked back and nearly gasped at the sight. I blinked once, twice, trying hard to erase the image of what I was seeing, but it still remained as the figure became smaller and smaller as we descended down the road. Is that a wolf? I sat back down on my seat, rolling up the window with a shaking hand. I shook my head slightly, trying to decipher what I had just seen. It was literally a pitch-black wolf, who seemed to be staring at me. How can a wolf be staring at me? I know many animals become curious when a vehicle would pass by. Hence the reason why there are so many accidents around the nation every year. But this wolf was different, in an odd way. And I couldn't put my finger on it. I know I couldn't see it very well, since my dad was driving at a fast amount of speed. But I could have sworn I saw some sort of intelligence in that creature's eyes. Okay. Black Forest. Colorado was officially driving me insane already. I shook my head and leaned my elbow against the window frame, laying my cheek against my hand as I let out a soft sigh. My dad must have noticed because I could suddenly feel his eyes on me. "Everything okay?" I nodded in response, not even looking his way. I instead began to wonder how the people in town would be like. How the students in school will be like. Which was my main priority. Like I have said before, I am not too much of a sociable person. And even if I was, I don't think many people would like me. The second they heard about how I had advanced a grade when I got to middle school, I was immediately labeled as the school nerd. Which I didn't really mind because it was nothing but the truth. I had no other stuff to do in my spare time. So I instead spent it doing tons and tons of homework. My desk was always packed with books. Whether it be from school or just for the sake of reading. People would automatically assume I was in college or something. But I wanted that to change. This was my senior year, for crying out loud. And I didn't want to spend it hidden behind books and make everyone think I was a loner or something. Which, again, I kind of was. Seeing as I have never had a boyfriend or anything. But it was never a necessity. As my dad finally turned down the road to our new home, I agreed to myself that I would try my best to make this year as memorable as I could. Maybe join the cheerleading squad or something. Yeah. Never mind. I was never too fond of the cheerleaders in my previous schools. You know how they are stereotyped in movies. Well, they are for a reason. Well, most of them, I should say. To my relief, my dad turned left and parked the truck in the driveway in front of our new home. I gathered my iPod that I had left on my lap and put it inside my back pocket as I exited out of the truck. My black Vans landed on the soft dirt beneath me with a loud thud. I looked up at the house, pleased to see how old-fashioned its appearance displayed. The house needed a new paint job, but it would suffice for the time being. It was a 2-story home with a large porch out in the front that held a small wooden swing that would definitely sit at least 2 average-sized people if the swing didn't decide to give way in the middle of someone sitting on it. There were 2 large windows that overlooked the front yard on the 2nd floor, which I automatically assumed were either the 2 bedrooms or simply one of them. The front yard wasn't entirely a mess, but it did need some attention, seeing as the grass was now a yellowish-brown and weeds were sprouting here and there. Where my dad had parked the car in the driveway was towards one side of the house, so I had a clear view of the backyard. It resembled the front one, but instead was surrounded by a forest that this town seemed to be known by. Hence the name. I chuckled at the thought as I made my way to the back of the truck and grabbed a hold of my favorite backpack. I don't know for how long I have had it, but the stains and the worn-out fabric showed that it has been with me for quite some time now. I smiled appreciatively down at it as I helped my dad with the rest of the luggage. Thankfully, my dad had shipped in our furniture ahead of time, so there was no sleeping on the floor for me. We made our way towards the porch, flinching slightly as our feet connected with the floorboards. It creaked and groaned as we slowly made our way to the front door, but there was no indication that it would give way anytime soon. The house was old. That was clear as day. But it still had character and proved that it would stand tall for who knows how many years more. My dad held the door open for me as I made my way inside. The house was dark, due to the windows being blocked by thin curtains that prevented any light from coming in. I looked to my left, seeing that there seemed to be a door that led to some other place in the house. As if hearing my thoughts, my father answered, That's the office area. That's where I'll be most of the time. He smiled sheepishly as he made his way to the living room, which was to my right. Before I followed him in, I began to observe my surroundings. The walls were painted a dark red color that have faded out throughout the years. The dark wooden floors appeared to have been polished recently, so they shined brightly despite the lack of lighting in the hallway. The wooden staircase, that was made up of the same wood as the floor, led to the second floor upstairs. It wasn't much of a grand entrance to a new home, but I liked it. It was simple, just what I have always preferred. I turned to my right and entered the living room. It was a decent-sized area that now contained the same furniture that my dad had decided to stay with after all these years. My mother had picked them out personally after they had moved into their new home, which still stands back in Texas. She seemed to have had a mixed taste of a colorful, yet classy, style. The two couches that we had were of a vibrant fabric, one being a bright blue, while the other was a bright green. In front of these two couches laid a classy-looking coffee table that seemed to match the floors of this house perfectly. I couldn't help but laugh at the coincidence. Below both the coffee table and the couches laid a bright purple carpet that appeared to be made out of fur. Thankfully for me, it wasn't. I've never been a fan of this whole fur fashion statement. I continued to look around the living room, smiling slightly as bittersweet memories of my mother entered my mind. I wasn't too young to not remember her, but as the years have gone by, the memories began to fade along with time. I tried to grasp onto as many memories as possible, but it just wasn't enough. Which is why I have a family picture of us three before her passing that I always had on my night table, whenever I felt the need to cry due to her absence in our lives. The picture always made me smile because of the goofy faces we all had decided to do when it was taken. We did take a serious one, but I had decided to keep that one instead since it always cheered me up even through my darkest times. I looked up at my dad, who seemed to be observing the furniture as well with a sorrowful expression. Apparently sensing my eyes on him, he turned to me and smiled. Not a hint of anguish from before displayed on his features. You just get settled upstairs in your room, kiddo. I'll take care of everything else. Most of the things inside the boxes are already up. I nodded in acknowledgement. I was relieved to have heard that my dad had decided to come down here to set up furniture a week before we both officially made our trip down to our new home. With the help of a friend, he had unloaded all of the furniture and important things, so the whole settling down process wouldn't be too hectic for us both. The less I had to help with, the better. I know I may do things for myself when it's necessary, but am primarily a lazy person when you get to know me better. I smiled as I made my way back into the hallway and began to ascend the stairs. Midway there, I stopped, forgetting to ask my dad which room was even mine. I know I could just look through the doors and discover them myself, but I didn't want to intrude his room. And yet, he always seemed to want to do so to mine. The irony. Just when I was about to call out, his head popped through the door frame that led to the living room with a smile creeping up his face. Yours is the one facing the backyard, and I think you might like something about it. With a wink, he disappeared back into the living room, leaving me dumbfounded. What was he talking about? With a shrug, I spun around and continued up the stairs. As my feet reached the top step, I was surprised to see that only 2 doors were on this floor with 2 windows adjacent to them. I looked at both of them and headed to the one right in front of where I stood. I opened it slowly, taking in a deep breath as the door creaked open. To my surprise, the room was quite larger than I envisioned it to be. My bed was lined up against the wall to my right with my favorite purple comforter and cushions. Beside the bed laid my wooden night table, which was painted black a few years back by my dad to complement the bedspread. Right beside the door was my desk where I usually worked on for many hours after school and on the weekends. As I walked forward, I couldn't help but smile at the small bookshelf that laid on the other side of the bed beside the window. The books were organized in alphabetical order, just like I always liked it. My dad had actually taken the time to organize them. Either that or he just took a picture of how I had it back in Chicago before dumping them all in the box. Typical dad. I placed my backpack on my bed, my smile broadening as I noticed the window seat. I actually had one. I walked towards it and sat against the cushions, smiling happily as I noticed that he had gotten me one that matched the rest of my purple obsession I seemed to have. I gazed down at the yard below before settling my eyes on the forest before me. It was quite impossible to see over the trees, even if I was on the second floor. But I could tell that it seemed to stretch on, for miles. I turned my head to my left, surprised that I had not noticed the other two doors in the room. Why were there two? I stood up and made my way to the one on the left, which stood right beside the main door. Opening it wide, I smiled as I realized that it was a walk-in closet. A decent-sized one at that. I backed away from the closet, leaving it slightly ajar, since I knew that I will have to settle my clothing eventually. It was Sunday afternoon, and tomorrow was my first day at my new school. Great. I walked over to the other door, wondering if I actually was the proud owner of two closets rather than one. But to my surprise, I was greeted by an ensuite bathroom. I couldn't contain my happiness as I jumped up and down and softly clapped my hands together. I may look like an idiot to someone if they were to walk into my room at this very moment, but I didn't care. I always had to share a bathroom with my dad, and to say that it was awkward and disgusting was an understatement. Let's just say that a person who is a neat freak sharing a bathroom with someone who doesn't necessarily care much for keeping things in order was not something that correlated with one another that well. I stepped inside and took in the area. To my left was a large counter that stretched onto the other side of the wall. Right in the middle was a small, round sink, which I hardly paid attention to after seeing the large amount of counter space I will have while living here. I turned to my right, seeing a large shower that took both ends of the wall with a small window that could easily hold my necessities. In the middle of the sink and shower was a decent-sized toilet. Typical bathroom if you asked me, but having it in my room made it that much better. I exited the bathroom with a smile on my face as I took in my new room. It was perfect. Simply perfect. As I looked down at my bags that were now on the floor, excluding my backpack, which was on my bed, I let out a loud groan. Coming here was the easy part. Unpacking and making everything just the way I liked was a completely different story. I made my way downstairs after a long afternoon of setting up my belongings. It was actually an easy task and I was surprised at how quickly I had done it all. The only reason I took long was due to the fact that I had decided to take a nice long shower to ease some of the stress that slowly began to form. I entered the living room and smiled at my dad, who was sitting comfortably in one of the couches with a plate of pizza in his hand. He wasn't one who was fond of cooking, which I didn't mind one bit. I actually enjoyed the task. I made my way to the other couch and helped myself to the plate of pizza my dad had laid out for me on the coffee table. I jumped and landed on the couch, glad that I had not spilled anything in the process. I smiled as my bare skin came in contact with the cool fabric of the couch. I was now wearing a black tank top with purple shorts. My typical nightgown. It was comfy and something I enjoyed wearing whenever I was done for the day and simply wanted to relax by the TV. I took a bite out of my pizza, almost groaning in pleasure as the double cheese slice nearly melted in my mouth. I gazed at the program that my dad was watching, not really paying much attention as I continued to devour the deliciousness that was waiting for me. "So are you ready for tomorrow, kiddo?" my dad asked, facing me for a brief second before allowing his eyes to fall on the TV once more. I gulped down the piece that I had in my mouth, suddenly losing my appetite as the realization of going to another new school dawned me. It was something I didn't want to think about in the few hours I had left before I had to go to sleep and go to school in the morning. I nodded, placing the plate on my lap as the sweet smell of my dinner no longer appealed to me, seeing as his eyes seemed to be glued onto the TV. He never even seemed to notice the frown that now laced my features. Just the thought of entering a new school surrounded by new students with classrooms that held new teachers made my stomach churn. I stood up slowly, my stomach suddenly filled with butterflies for an unknown reason. I have been to many new schools before. What made this one any different? Yeah. I hated the fact that I had to start new again. But I was able to cope with my new surroundings. Why the sudden nervousness? I shook my head at the thought as I made my way to the kitchen. I placed the leftover pizza inside the box before settling the plate inside the dishwasher. I would probably have to do them in the morning since I knew that my dad never even bothered, no matter the quantity of dishes it contained. I made my way back to the living room, stopping beside his couch and leaning down to give him a good night's kiss. "I'm heading to bed now," I mumbled as I walked away, not even bothering to wait for a reply, since I knew he was too intrigued with the TV to even notice my presence. As I entered my room, I closed the door shut behind me, letting out a loud sigh before making my way to my bed. In one swift movement, I was beneath the covers and snuggling against my pillows, waiting for sleep to take over my conscious mind. It was now running at high speed, with thoughts of what tomorrow may bring. I had no idea why I even bothered to think about it. But something in my gut told me that this new town that we were in was a lot different than the others. I stared at my appearance in the full-length mirror that hung behind my bedroom door. I tilted my head slightly, pursing my lips as I gave myself a once-over. I had decided to wear my dark jeans with my favorite old Converse that I've had for who knows how long, accompanied with a simple white tank top and a gray cardigan with large horizontal purple stripes. It was decent enough for the first day of school. My first day at this school. I stared at my long wavy hair that seemed to be a complete mess above my head. I sighed heavily as I walked over to my small dresser and pulled out a gray clip. It was quite large and it will do the trick to tame the beast that decided to take over during the night. With a twist of my hair, I clasped the clip over and walked back to the mirror, satisfied with my appearance. I smiled and grabbed a hold of my backpack. Making my way downstairs, I was greeted by the scent of freshly made coffee. It was a surprise to smell that at this early hour due to the fact that my dad was usually out of the house and off to work before I even woke up in the morning. I turned the corner and was greeted by a beaming smile. My dad was sitting at the dining room table with the newspaper in hand, no doubt reading the sports section. That was really the only reason that he ever read it to begin with. I dropped my bag on the floor as I entered the kitchen, grabbing the box of my favorite cereal and pouring it into a bowl. Morning. You ready for your big day? I couldn't help but cringe at his words. But he didn't seem to notice as he went back to reading whatever he was previously. I simply shrugged my shoulders and tried the best I could to not let the nervousness show in my features. Geez. Rochelle. What the hell is wrong with you? I'm ready as I'll ever be. And come on, Dad. You make it seem like I'm getting married or something, I said playfully, rolling my eyes as I sat on the chair across from him. And one question. What are you doing here? He peered above the newspaper with a raised eyebrow. I couldn't help but smile at the gesture. You know what I mean. You're usually out by the time I wake up. He nodded his head knowingly. Well, the boss told me that since it's my first day, he'll cut me some slack if I were to come late. And not to mention that I told him a little bit about you and how you were starting school here. So he said that he had no problem in me taking you for the first day. I made a disgusted face as he said the last part, trying my hardest to not laugh as I noticed his reaction. Oh. Is the young senior too old to have her daddy take her to school? He asked in a mocking voice. I couldn't help but roll my eyes as I continued my breakfast. Without anything else being said, I allowed my eyes to wander to the backyard. I stared out at the trees that seemed to surround every single inch of the back of our house. I wonder what could be out there. I'm not too much of an adventurous person, despite the fact that my dad and I always liked going fishing during the summer in the woods. But I was indeed a curious one. These forests seemed to have a mysterious tone to them and I couldn't help the urge to explore. But that's when the memory of the wolf coming out of the trees entered my mind. Who knows how many wolves can be lurking about, just waiting for an idiotic human being to cross their path and have them as their afternoon snack. I definitely don't want to go in there, knowing that these forests were the wolves' habitat. I'm too young to die. When I looked back at my bowl, I was surprised to find it already empty. My dad did say that I tend to eat faster absent-mindedly whenever I was deep in thought. Huh. I guess he was right. I stood up and placed the bowl in the sink, my dad following step with me and repeating the same action with his cup. He patted my shoulder as he exited the kitchen and walked towards the living room. Let's get going. Don't want you to be late. I let out a soft groan, making sure that he didn't hear it. The last thing I wanted to do today was go early to my new school. I was a nerd enough already. Having me come early before most of the other students was just plain, well, nerdy. Reluctantly, I stepped forward and grabbed my bag off the floor, swinging it over my shoulder as I made my way towards the front door. My dad was already waiting for me there with his keys in his hand. I grabbed mine from where we usually held our keys, on the coffee table, and stepped out the door behind him. I locked the door behind me and went down the few steps to head towards the driveway. I may be 16. But I do have my license, and I could easily drive anywhere I decided to. Yeah. I know it might seem a little too young for me to have one, but those were the perks of being a nerd. I got my permit just when I was turning 15 when I was sophomore and got my license a year later, which was just a few months back really. But even if I did have my license, my dad never allowed me to drive, even if he was with me. Talk about overprotectiveness on his part. It only took about 10 minutes to get to my school, which was really a disappointment to me. As I looked up to the front entrance, I noticed the school's name, Black Forest High. Typical. With a heavy sigh, I exited my dad's truck, giving him a small wave as he left me on my own. I may be 16. But now was really a good time to have my dad walk with me to the main office while holding my hand. I had to admit, that was extremely childish of me to even think of. I have done this many times before, and yet here I am with clammy hands, and butterflies flying freely around in my stomach without a care in the world. Maybe it was because it was my last year and senior year seemed to be important for many high school students. I walked quickly towards the entrance. Feeling curious, stares bore onto my back as I made my way across the parking lot. I could have sworn I heard many conversations around me dwindle a bit as I walked. Great. Now, I'm the new talk of the school. But of course I will be. It was freaking October for crying out loud. It's not like it's the middle of the school year or anything. But a lot of time has already passed since the first day, and I'm pretty sure the school was close to having its homecoming dance pretty soon. Straightening my stance slightly, I opened the large double doors and made my way inside. The hallway was like any other typical hallway. It had lockers on either side of its walls, leaving a small opening in between that led to the classrooms. The linoleum floors shined under the luminescent lights that hung above my head. The janitors must have waxed it this weekend. I made my way slowly through the hallway, searching every door to see if there was any indication of the main office being near. I was glad to see that not many of the students were inside the school yet, so it made it less obvious that I was the new kid. I walked forward, not paying any attention to my surroundings until I felt my body collide with someone else's. The impact was so sudden that I was immediately sent flying backwards and towards the floor. I closed my eyes shut, waiting for my body to collide with the freshly waxed floors. But the sensation never came. Instead, I felt two large arms wrap themselves around my waist and pull me against a hard chest. I didn't dare to open my eyes as I felt my cheeks blush brightly as I stood in the arms of a complete stranger. It wasn't until the sound of his voice forced me to look up at my savior. "Are you okay?" I opened my eyes slowly, tilting my head upward to look at his face. It was pretty hard to see who he was, because he was so freaking tall. He must have been around 65 or something. I had to strain my neck just to look into his eyes. But I immediately regretted it. As I stared up at him, I couldn't help but notice how handsome he was. He had jet black hair with dark brown eyes that nearly resembled his hair color. His eyes seemed to captivate me and I was pulled into a trance that left me speechless. I opened my mouth a few times, but no words dared to come out. My voice had completely failed me when I needed it the most. I noticed that he still held on to me, his strong arms holding me protectively against his hard form. Snapping back to reality, I pushed my hands against his chest, relieved to find that he was releasing his hold on me. I brushed my clothes off, trying hard to distract myself so I wouldn't have to look back into those dark orbs. But the urge to look at him once more was tempting me to no end. Giving in, I looked up and took in his appearance. He really was tall as I expected him to be, and his body seemed to tower over me. He wore a black shirt that clung to his body in all the right places, revealing the delicious muscles that laid underneath. With this he had on dark jeans and black shoes. I actually wondered what his butt looked like with those jeans on. Silly me. Suddenly, I was brought back to reality from the sound of his husky voice. "Are you okay?" he repeated. His eyes were filled with concern. And all I could do was nod. My voice was completely failing me, and I didn't want to look like an idiot by not responding in some way. Are you new here? Again I nodded. Damn his sexiness and his effect on me. He smiled down at me. It was warm and sincere, and I couldn't help but smile in return. What the heck was I doing? I was acting like one of those teenage girls in the movies when a hot guy comes up to talk to them. But now I understand why they got so giddy about it. And this guy was way too hot for his own good. Looking for the main office. I nodded. Just continue down the hall and take your first right. You'll be good from there. I gave him a weak smile as I made my way around him. It wasn't until then that I noticed he had two other guys standing right behind him. How did I not see them to begin with? I tried to walk as casual as I could after that encounter with. Damn it. I didn't even ask him his name. It's not like I had a chance anyway. And yet, I could feel his dark eyes staring at me as I made my way down the hallway. As I reached the first turn to my right, the second I was out of sight. I leaned against the white wall and took deep breaths. What the heck? Why was I so breathless after bumping into him? That was unusual. I shook my head, trying hard to clear my now foggy mind. I turned my body and made my way down the hall I was currently in and began to search for the main office. It took me a few minutes to find it. But I finally did. Who in the world makes a main office to a school so hidden? I mean, who could even find this place within their first try? I opened the door and was greeted by the smell of freshly printed paper and coffee of different sorts. A woman sat at the front desk with thin glasses on top of her plump nose. She had reddish-brown hair and dark brown eyes. She wore a simple pink suit with a white blouse underneath. The second I walked in, her eyes met mine and a warm smile spread across her thin lips. Well, hello. Dear. Are you new here? I nodded, as I smiled weakly at her. I hated being the new kid. Well, tell me your name. Sweetheart. I'll get you your papers right away so you can get to homeroom on time. Rochelle James. Ma'am. With a nod of her head. She turned to the computer on her right, and typed in my name quickly, with her slender fingers. She nodded again and clicked on the mouse. The sound of something printing following after. She stood up and walked towards the printer, grabbing a sheet of paper before making her way back to her desk. Here you go, sweetheart. Your locker and combination is written on the bottom. It's not that hard to find your way around the school since we only have one floor. Have a wonderful first day. I had to admit, her cheery mood wasn't really helping the fretfulness that was creeping up inside of me as I stood there. I gave her a weak smile and grabbed the paper, skimming through my classes. I wasn't surprised to see that actually all of my classes were AP Advanced Placement, if anyone didn't know. I know. Typical nerd. I only had 6 periods. Which really wasn't bad seeing as my last school had 8 classes. Trust me. It was not that pleasant. Apparently. I would start off the day with AP English Senior Level, followed by AP Calculus, then AP American History, AP Chemistry, AP English Junior Level, and last but not least, AP Government. With a shrug of my shoulders, I made my way out of the office and towards my first class. The bell was going to ring in any minute and I had no time to stop by my locker to drop off anything. With my nose glued onto my schedule, I didn't dare make any eye contact with the students around me. I knew they were staring at me as if I was an idiot due to the fact that I never once looked up from the paper in front of me. To be honest, I was just trying my hardest to memorize the class numbers, so I wouldn't have to be looking like this every single time the bell rang, cueing everyone to go to their next class. I know I looked pretty stupid, but I was saving myself from any further embarrassment later on in the day. Once I found my class, I was relieved to see that I had stepped in right when the bell rang. As I looked around the room, I was disappointed to find that all the back seats were taken and the only one that was available was the one closest to the door in the front row. With a low groan, so nobody could hear me, I slowly made my way to the desk, feeling a set of eyes on me the entire time. Before I sat down, I looked up and immediately met familiar dark one sitting near the back of the class. He was surrounded by teenagers that were giving me quick glances and were obviously talking about me by the way they continuously whispered to one another so I wouldn't hear what they were saying. How nice. Ignoring the quiet murmuring around him, he gave me that breathtaking smile he had given me earlier, making me catch my breath instantly, feeling the slow blush creeping up my cheeks. I quickly turned away and took my seat, burying my face in my hands as I heard the door of the classroom open, and footsteps soon followed after. I looked up to find a decent-sized man with short dark hair and blue eyes standing in front of the class. He wore a long-sleeved gray shirt with a red vest on top as well as khaki pants and brown shoes. Odd combination if you asked me. "Good morning, class." Everyone around him either smiled or nodded in response. As I looked at him, I couldn't help but notice how the teacher bowed his head slightly as he stared at one student, following his line of sight. My eyes settled on my mysterious savior, who had a nonchalant expression on his face. I could see his jaw tense slightly as he noticed me staring at him, but never once did he ever meet my eyes. Well, that's just strange. Ignoring the gesture the teacher gave him, I spun back around and turned my attention back to the front of the classroom where the professor began his lesson for the day. Finally, it was lunchtime, and my stomach was practically growling in anticipation as I caught the scent of today's meal. It was typical school food, but I couldn't care less. I was that hungry. I had settled with macaroni and cheese with spinach and a chocolate milk. Not the ideal meal that a teenager would want to have on a Monday morning, but it was better than the mystery meat that they were serving. Blah. Not to mention I am a vegetarian, so that wouldn't suit well with me. As I paid for my lunch food, I turned around and searched the cafeteria for an empty table. I hated the fact that I needed to sit alone, but I didn't want to eat standing up or sitting down in a filthy corner of the lunchroom. To my disappointment, there was not a single empty table in sight. There were a few empty chairs here and there, but I knew that I would not be welcomed if I were to randomly sit in one of them. With a soft sigh, I made my way towards the entrance of the cafeteria, feeling heavy stares on me once more as I exited. The second I heard the door shut behind me, I stopped and closed my eyes, taking a deep breath as the stress of the day began to settle on me. Get a grip, Rochelle. The day's almost over. Only 2 more classes to go, and you get to go home. After a few seconds of standing there, trying to calm down my racing heart and mind, I began to wander the halls in search of the only place I have ever felt comfortable in. Thankfully, I had discovered over the years that it was the one place where students rarely went to. thanks to technology. And yes, people, I am talking about none other than the library. As I turned the corner, I was relieved to be greeted by two large double doors with a sign reading library above them. I grabbed the handle and pulled the door open, trying hard to balance out the tray I still had in my hand. With a lot of difficulty, I successfully made my way inside and was greeted by curious eyes behind a large desk. Giving the librarian a small smile, I made my way over to one of the large bookshelves farthest away from the main entrance. Seeing as the librarian made no effort to tell me anything about bringing food to the library, I didn't bother to sit at one of the nearby wooden tables. I turned to my left and descended down the narrow aisle behind the last bookshelf. To my right was just a plain wall, and to my left were large bookshelves that contained who knows how many books. I smiled to myself. I knew exactly what I'll be doing during my lunch hour if I were to ever lose my appetite from the meal they were serving. I dropped my bag towards the end and slid my body down the wall adjacent to the bookshelves. Crossing my legs beneath me, I balanced the tray and began to devour my lunch. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, and I was left with a satisfied tummy. Placing the tray to my side, I crossed my arms over my chest and leaned back, letting out a long, heavy sigh. I seem to have been doing that a lot today. But it wasn't my fault if you asked me. This school seemed to put me on edge, and I couldn't help but notice the small voice in the back of my mind that kept telling me that something was up in this school. Something was not necessarily wrong, but rather something was being hidden. Although I felt like there was a mystery behind this school and the students and faculty that occupied it, I couldn't help but feel that the truth was right under my nose. I shook my head and shut my eyes tightly. This place was starting to get to me, and my thoughts were starting to be wilder than before. I really needed to get a grip before I completely lost it. But what I didn't know was that this was simply the beginning of a whole new chapter in my life. No pun intended. The week went by rather quickly. And before I knew it, it was already Friday morning. And I would be lying if I said I wasn't happy that the weekend had finally arrived. I mean, it's not like it was a bad week or anything. It's just that no one even bothered to get acquainted with me. Not even when it came to discussing an assignment for class. Was I really that much of a bad person to approach? But I always pushed that thought aside whenever I was left sitting on my own in my now usual spot in the library or in my classes. I really did want to make this year a memorable one. But everyone didn't seem to want to give me the chance to make it happen. So, instead, I was left to myself in my hollow shell that I grew comfortable with over the years. As I made my way to homeroom, I couldn't help but notice how many of the students were chatting with each other consistently about some party that was probably happening this weekend. I guess that's something I wasn't attending. I finally entered the classroom after practically being bombarded by high school teenagers who seemed to be a little too animated for the early morning. I wasn't at all a morning person, but I always tried my best not to show it. And seeing all of them with grinning faces, as they talked more about this party, didn't help my situation whatsoever. I sat down in my seat, pulling out my notebook for this class and doodling absent-mindedly around the cover. I didn't exactly know what I was drawing, but it seemed like it was just a bunch of squiggly lines if you asked me. It wasn't until I heard the sound of a female's high-pitched voice that I became intrigued in the conversation that was starting to occur just a few seats behind me. I recognized the voice instantly. Her name was Claudia, and she had to be one of the most stuck-up seniors I have ever encountered in this school. Thankfully, I only had her for this class, and she never even dared to come up to talk to me. But she still always managed to give me harsh glares whenever I walked down the hallway. Why? I had no clue. So, are you excited for tonight, Marcus? She asked my savior who sat next to her. Ah. So that was his name. Yes. Within this entire week of me attending this school, I never even dared to listen in for his name. It didn't even matter anyway. Yeah. I guess. More like nervous if you ask me. There were a few bits of laughter from the other students sitting around him. I couldn't help but wonder if he was the one throwing the party that everyone around the school seemed to be talking about. He did seem to be Mr. Popular. But I never once noticed if he was in some sport here. He was fit to perfection and it seemed as if he did some extracurricular activity. But I never saw him staying after school for any sort of practice. Instead, he would always be standing in the parking lot with a whole mess of people surrounding him. Particularly girls. I know. I sound like a stalker, but it was a little bit hard not to observe these things, since there always appeared to be an eager crowd surrounding him within every hour of the day. So who do you think is your mate? Do you think she's part of this pack, or do you have to travel to another one? Claudia asked him, her voice sounding a little higher than usual. Mate. Pack. What the hell were they talking about? My eyebrows pulled together as I tried to decipher the meaning in her words. But I wound up with nothing. Instead of giving myself a headache, which was already starting to occur on my right side, I just went on with mindless doodling and continued to eavesdrop on their conversation. It might have seemed rude, but they were talking loud enough that practically the whole school could hear. Shh. This time, it was a masculine voice. It probably was one of the guys that was standing beside my savior, Marcus. Earlier this week, I didn't know his name. But oh well. I wasn't looking forward to learning any names unless it was necessary. Shut it, Claudia. You can't talk about that around here. I could practically picture her brown eyes open wide in confusion as she asked. Why not? It's not like. Her voice suddenly trailed off as I felt many eyes on me seconds later. I couldn't help but grow tense under their gaze. Why were they all looking at me? I felt the urge to look back and tell them off. But something in the back of my mind held me at bay. There was something unorthodox about them. Everyone in the school really. Excluding a few students that seemed normal in my eyes. And I felt as if talking back at them would only put me in a load of trouble that I was far from interested in. Oh. You mean her? She asked quietly. But her voice was still audible to my ears. Sure. Go ahead and talk about me as if I'm not even here. Who cares about her? She doesn't even know what we're talking about. I don't even know why she even came here to begin with. She doesn't belong with the rest of us. Claudia. The same masculine voice scolded at her. I remembered noticing that their features were pretty much alike, and I couldn't help but wonder if they were related in some way. Siblings maybe. What? Her voice was laced with fake innocence, and I couldn't help but glare down at my notebook. Something about her just ticked me off, and the sudden urge to just give her a piece of my mind was increasing. And that thought literally took me by surprise. I never was a violent person. Call me a hippie, but I never believed that violence was ever the answer when a conflict would arise. I preferred talking it out before things got out of hand. But hearing that irritating voice of hers got me on edge and wishing that she never even existed. Claudia. I suggest you quiet down. She doesn't need to know about this. His voice was literally music to my ears. It was low yet firm. And there was a hint to it that puzzled me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it felt like he was in a way disgusted. Yet at the same time disappointed. Strange combination, really. I turned my head slightly as I allowed my eyes to gaze out the window. Since I had my hair picked up in a ponytail today, it wasn't that difficult to see them from the corner of my eye. With my eyes trained on the scenery outside, I immediately focused my attention on him. Marcus. It was a nice name for a guy, and I couldn't help but repeat it a few times in my mind. It just felt so natural for me to say it. Weird. Right. But as my attention was set solely on him, a rush of anger boiled up inside of me as I caught the sight of someone's hand on his left shoulder. Claudia. I had to admit. Claudia wasn't exactly ugly like I hoped she'd be. Instead, she was quite attractive, much to my dismay. She was tall and slender with a fair tan, dark brown hair and light brown eyes. She always seemed to wear clothes that were a bit too revealing for a school. Probably trying to get other males' attention. Especially his. Today she was wearing a light pink tank top with khaki shorts and flats. Despite of the chilly air that was now taking over the town. What confused me the most was my reaction to seeing her hand lying carelessly over his shoulder. From where I sat, I could tell he was a bit uncomfortable at the gesture, and I couldn't help the urge that ran through my body to simply stand up and rip her filthy hand off. Okay. Where were these thoughts even coming from? As I glared out the window, my breathing coming out in heavy pants as I tried to calm down my now agitated body, I suddenly felt a pair of dark eyes on me. I immediately looked back down at my notebook. A hint of red taking over my cheeks. I felt embarrassed for being caught in the act. I knew they were eventually going to find out how I was eavesdropping on their conversation. But I definitely didn't want them to be the one to do it. I gripped my pen harshly with my hand, my knuckles turning white, and I was surprised to see that the pen hadn't snapped in my grasp, which I was grateful for. I needed this pen for the rest of the day. I had accidentally forgotten my small pouch where I keep all of my writing utensils on my desk at home, and I was lucky to find this one hidden at the bottom of my backpack. To my relief, I heard the door open and the professor enter. He didn't bother greeting us and went straight to the lesson for the day. But this didn't stop Claudia from continuing the conversation. So Marcus, what do you think are the chances of me being your mate? Desperate much? And what was this constant talk about mates? It just sounded deviant when these people kept on saying it. Told you this was a weird town. I don't know. Claudia. Well, just have to find out at the stroke of midnight. He responded nonchalantly, which surprisingly made me at ease. If you guys are mates, I would feel extremely sorry for the moon goddess pairing you guys up. My sister is not easy to deal with. This was the other masculine voice who had spoken earlier. Huh. So they were related. Possibly twins. Shut up, Ethan. Nobody told you to get into this conversation, she retorted, a lace of anger filling her every word. Well, it's kind of hard not to when you're sitting right behind me. A low chuckle erupted from someone in the group, and I couldn't help but smile at the sound. I knew exactly where it came from, and just the mere sound of it filled me with butterflies that were becoming extremely difficult to control. Well, I wouldn't mind you being mate, Claudia. There would be a few things I would love to do to you the second you realize you belong with me. Another male voice responded. I can only guess this was the other guy who had been standing behind Marcus that day. In your dreams, Alex. With that, I could sense that she had settled herself in her seat and I couldn't be happier. Amazing how someone finds out a few names by simply eavesdropping on another's conversation without their knowledge. It's quite entertaining, really. All right. Settle down. You may talk about Marcus' party after class. Right now we must focus on your upcoming assignment. It will be a book report on one of the books on this list. He lifted up his hand and showed the class a stack of papers. Probably the names of different books we most likely had to read. The sound of groans erupted in the class and I was pretty sure that everyone was slumping lower in their chairs. Unlike me, I was already used to writing many book reports and there was no doubt in my mind that I had already read at least one of the novels on that list. I always liked reading books that were a level ahead of me. I always found it fascinating discovering new words that I could add to my vocabulary. The professor walked around the class, handing a few sheets of paper to each student that were sitting in the front row. As I was handed my stack to pass along to the person behind me, I took a quick glance at the list. At least half of the list were books I have already read, as well as I enjoyed throughout this past summer. The only reason why I had read them to begin with was because my teacher back in Chicago had handed me a sheet that showed a general list of books which most schools in the United States had to read for their senior English class. Seeing as I had a lot of time on my hands, I read almost every single book that I was able to purchase at the nearest bookstore. After a quick scan, I left a sheet above my notebook and passed the rest of the stack to the person behind me. A smile crept along my lips as I folded the paper in half and placed it inside my notebook. Well, this was going to be an easy assignment. For me at least. The last bell had finally rung and I was more than happy to leave AP Government. I always dreaded my history classes. It wasn't like I didn't like history or anything. The teachers that always taught them were just plain boring. And the professor I had for this class had to be the top most boring history teacher I have ever encountered in my school years. I prefer reading out of the books rather than listen to that monotone voice of his. I walked over to my locker, pressing in my combination before I opened it wide. These locks weren't the ones where you had to twist and turn them a dozen times before you were able to open the damn thing. These were simple. They had small number pads where you punched in a 4-digit code and it opens automatically. How cool was that? I placed all the needed materials I would use for the weekend in my backpack and left the others inside the locker. I slammed it hard, the locker protesting with a small groan as I walked away. I didn't want to stay here any longer. I needed to be in a place where I felt comfortable. Or learn to feel comfortable, since I had only lived there for merely a few amount of days. As I passed through the doors, I couldn't help but smile slightly as I remembered the fishing trip my dad had planned for us this weekend. Luckily for me, the job he currently had wasn't one that needed him practically 24/7. With this one, he was actually able to take the weekends off and spend some quality time with me. The funny part about all of this was that we actually rent a cabin south from where we are now. When we used to live in Texas, my dad, Mom and I would spend the summers there and go fishing. How funny it is that we now actually live in the same state. Well, it's not technically ours because we only rent it. But we are practically the only ones that actually do. My dad hopes to buy it someday, so when he finally retires, he can live there and go fishing for as long as he wants. I know what you're thinking. Why is a vegetarian going on a fishing trip with her dad when she doesn't eat meat? Don't worry. That answer is simple. I never actually eat the fish. I do help my dad cook it since he isn't one of the greatest cooks on this planet. But I do it reluctantly. Whenever I do, I feel as if it's screaming out in agony, begging for me to put it back in the water. Weird, right? But that's how I usually think. As my father enjoys his meal, I tend to just eat a homemade salad I bring along as I read a book outside on the back porch. That's sort of my sanctuary. My dad only intrudes whenever he thinks it's getting late and I should go off to bed. Other than that, he allows me to be outdoors in the quietness of nature as he watches something on TV in the living room. Thankfully for me, the living room is on the front side of the house, so all I could hear is the soft murmuring of the voices talking. I passed by many cars with teenagers lounging about, talking about the party for tonight. What was so great about it? I know he is the talk of the school, but do they really need to make such a big deal about it? They were acting extremely idiotic, if you asked me. It's just a party that most likely will happen again and again throughout the year. Seniors were known to party until they were partied out, especially because of all the alcohol and drugs that were sooner or later snuck in. Hence the reason why I never go to any of them. That. And I never seem to get invited. Pity. I made my way through the parking lot, ignoring the constant chatter that went on around me, and exited the school's grounds. I turned right and began my usual walk home. Having a car would be ideal now, but seeing that there was barely any space to park inside the school, I preferred walking. And besides, it provided a great source of exercise that I was in dire need of. I wasn't getting chunky or anything, but I liked to stay active whenever I could. Active in the sense of simply walking long distances. Not doing a sport that would eventually kill me due to the lack of agility I have. Hey, I am only human. After about 20 to 30 minutes, I finally reached my home, which seemed isolated from the others. That was the good thing about this neighborhood. There was always a large distance between each home, so there was no need to worry about any loud noises that your neighbors would make. Especially the party that was apparently going to occur later on tonight. I entered my house, surprised to find my dad sitting on his favorite couch watching TV. At the sound of the door opening, he turned around and gave me his heartwarming smile. I smiled in return and walked towards him, planting a kiss on his cheek before a puzzled look took over my features. "What are you doing here this early?" He laughed quietly as he sat up straighter, giving me his undivided attention, which was a surprise to me. He always seemed to have something to do, so he rarely paid any attention to me unless it was needed. Well, this job does down on the couch opposite of him, letting my backpack slide onto the floor in front of me. Yeah. They wouldn't shut up about it today. I don't see why it's such a big deal anyway. I crossed my arms and looked at the TV, not even bothering to pay any attention to what I was seeing. Silence erupted in the room, my dad's eyes still on me as I continued to stare at the TV. It wasn't long until his voice echoed around the room. "Do you want to raise an eyebrow at me?" Not buying what I was saying. Ugh. I hated how he didn't believe me sometimes. This man was a handful. With a heavy sigh, I turned my head to look at him dead in the eyes as I said slowly, "I don't want to go, Dad. I prefer fishing," says the vegetarian. He muttered playfully as he resumed his previous position on the couch. I glared at him mockingly before I stood up and grabbed my bag. "Is death and it was perfectly understandable. They were soulmates. And losing her had to be one of the greatest unfortunate events my dad ever had to encounter. His first was losing his father after he had come back from serving at war. But that wasn't as great as this one. My mom and dad had been going out since his senior year and her junior year in high school. They never once broke it off, and even during his time where he had to leave the country. She was completely faithful to him as he was to her. Their love story chill in the air. I pulled out my suitcase from under my bed and proceeded to packing all the necessities I needed for the trip. Which wasn't much. After packing in my underwear, I wasn't going to wear clothes without anything under. I entered my closet and pulled out 2 long-sleeved shirts and 2 tank tops to accompany them. They didn't cling to my body, which was perfect for the semi-hot weather I was most likely going to endure once I got there. Grabbing 2 pairs of shorts, I placed them all neatly. Inside hours have already passed, and we were already close to our usual cabin. The trees were a lot denser here than the ones around our new home. But I didn't mind. I found it quite extravagant as I stared at them while my dad went down the dirt road. The truck was filled with a comfortable silence as we neared our destination. Finally, after a few more dreadful minutes of my bottoms suffering the now hard leather seats below me, my dad pulled up to the cabin and I couldn't help the smile that spread across my face. This his door. He didn't bother to say anything after he saw me walking to the lake that laid out in front of the cabin. Isn't that awesome? Taking off my sneakers, I walked towards the still unfrozen lake. It did get frozen throughout the winter, you know. Beneath me, the short green grass turned into small pebbles as I made my way towards the small dock that hovered over the water. It was my favorite place to be while we were here. The calmness and silence of the lake always made me feel edging back to the cabin. I grabbed my shoes along the way before sitting on the small stool beside the front door. A towel laid beside it. No doubt it being placed by my dad at some point. After a moment of drying off, I headed inside and began to make us a small dinner. It had been a few hours since we had eaten and I was quietly reading a novel I had brought along with me in the back porch that overlooked the forest. I had changed my clothes to one of my long-sleeved shirts and shorts. Despite the chilly air that was now, I hated how I would get so caught up in a story that I would lose track of time, and that would make me lose some sleep every now and then. I'm surprised, I'm not sleep deprived yet. Just when I was about to stand up and head inside, I heard something shuffling against the bushes, causing my body to jump on high alert. Placing the book on the railing beside me, I searched the trees with wary eyes. My heart was beating at a fast pace, pounding loudly in my ears. Jumping off of the wooden stoop at me. But I couldn't help it. I didn't want to wander off too much in the woods, so I kept myself at a safe distance from the cabin. I'm pretty sure my dad was still sleeping soundly on the couch, so he wouldn't have even noticed my brief disappearance. I didn't plan on staying out here too long. The forest was starting to give me the creeps anyway. I looked around, trying hard to not make a sound as I cautiously made my way through the deep undergrowth of the forest grounds. They seemed to darken in color as the creature approached. And that's when I caught sight of what it was. My mouth gaped open as recognition dawned on me. It was the same wolf I had seen the first day I had arrived at Black Forest. What the heck was it doing here? As it continued to stare at me, I couldn't help but feel safe in its presence. I felt no danger emanating off of the creature before me. But I was more surprised to get a random sensation where all I wanted to do, which I came. I made sure to never look away from it. It watched me carefully, taking in my every move as I made my way towards the bushes near the cabin. Just when I was about a few feet away, I heard it whimper softly before taking a step in my direction. The sound of it nearly broke my heart, and I wanted nothing more than to go to it and comfort him as best as I could, if it even waits a him. But reality struck me just then, and I turned around and ran towards the cabin, ignoring the book I had been reading just minutes before. I rushed towards my bedroom upstairs. I'm not caring about the loud thuds my feet made as it collided against the wooden floors beneath me. I didn't care if I woke up my dad just then. I just wanted to distance myself from that wolf and bury myself beneath my covers, before I officially lost my mind. I don't know what had come over me. I wanted to go to it, to comfort it the second I heard that sound. I wanted to comfort a beast that could easily take my life with a single swipe of its enormous claws. And yet, here I am, my body begging to go back to the woods where I last saw it and never leave its side. Why was I feeling this way? Why did I feel such a powerful connection all of a sudden for a creature that was meant to be in the wild? All these questions swirled about in my mind as I slowly fell into a dreamless sleep, pacing back and forth in my room, my mind going 100 miles an hour. And I couldn't shake the nervousness out of my system. I rubbed my now clammy hands on my jeans as I listened to the sounds that came from downstairs. The constant chatter of my pack got me on edge. Their eager voices reached my sensitive ears, and it was not helping my situation whatsoever. I have been waiting for this night my entire life, and now it has finally arrived. My 18th birthday. Anyone would think that the only reason why it is so special is because it symbolizes one's growth into adulthood. And they are not wrong. But for us werewolves, it is quite different. Especially if you are a descendant of one of the most powerful alphas in the entire country. My pack is the Black Forest Pack. Hence the reason why we live in Black Forest, Colorado. We are the largest pack in the United States as well as the most powerful one. We have over 400 pack members, and the number increases with every year after a couple mates and bears a child. It is quite extraordinary being raised in a pack as large as mine. But it has its faults as well. It's difficult to keep track of everything, and I am amazed that my father handles it so well. He is currently the alpha of my pack, and in 3 years, he will be handing the title to me. And just the mere thought makes me anxious again. Great! Tonight was the night where I will finally meet my mate. I know what you are all thinking. Shouldn't I have found her the second I laid eyes on her? Well, that is the case for ordinary werewolves. When they meet their mates, the sparks fly instantly and they immediately recognize each other. But I'm different. Being of the alpha bloodline forces me to wait until I am 18 inches older to find my mate. My father actually told me that before we come of age and where our true alpha powers ignite within us, making us the most powerful wolf in the pack, we can actually sense our mate. Not to the extent where we automatically know they were created to be ours, but we just have that small feeling. He once told me at a very young age that when he set eyes on my mother for the first time, he had felt something. It wasn't the immediate sparks everyone talks about, but it was still something. On the night where he turned 18, he immediately caught her scent in the crowd, and the rest is pretty much history. It's really annoying if you ask me, having to wait until that age just to find the person I am destined to spend the rest of my life with. But I know it will be worth it. I couldn't help but wonder how my mate will be like. Will she be a part of this pack, or will I have to travel to another just to find her? What if she was a rogue? I couldn't help but shiver at the thought. Rogues were soulless, and having a rogue as a mate will be quite difficult. I know I wouldn't give up on her. But it might arise some questions as to how great of a leader I will be. But I didn't care. Whomever was destined to be my mate will be the person I will give my entire love to. At that thought, a face appeared in my mind. Ever since I had laid eyes on her, her face had never once left my mind. She even appeared in several of my dreams this week. My dad had mentioned about a pair of humans moving into our territory, and I was sent out to keep a watchful eye on them. When I once spotted them, I knew instantly that they will not be a threat to our pack. I was about to head back to the pack house until I spotted her. Her face made me stop dead on my tracks, and I couldn't help but emerge from the trees as she looked out the window. She spotted me instantly, and I knew she wasn't believing what she was seeing. Of course she wouldn't. Anybody who ever saw us in the woods by accident would think we were mutated wolves or something. We are quite large in size. Especially me because of my bloodline. The very next day, her first day at school, I had immediately caught her scent and verified that she was indeed a human. As my best friends, Ethan and Alex, walked beside me, caught up on whatever conversation they were talking about, I couldn't take my eyes off her. My wolf kept on pushing me towards her, but he never dared to tell me why. She was heading my way, and I took this very chance to just be close to her. She had been walking on my right side, so I moved in front of her path. She probably thought it was a mere accident. But it wasn't on my part. I didn't know what made me do it. But I felt at peace once I held her in my arms. It was quite amusing to see her blush at my touch, and I couldn't help but smile at the gesture. Ethan and Alex had asked me after our little encounter what was going on. But I just insisted that my dad told me to keep an eye on her since she was new to the territory. Ethan knew something was up but didn't dare question it. Alex, as always, just went with it and began talking about another subject. Once I had reached homeroom, ignoring the constant chatter of my pack mates around me, I instantly smelled her scent approaching us. I couldn't be more happier when I saw that she had the same homeroom as I did. I was rather disappointed that that was the only class we had in common. But at least it was better than nothing. I did plan on getting to know her better. When the professor had walked in, he had done the usual greeting to everyone and the usual respectful one to me. Unfortunately, for me, she instantly noticed, and I dared not look in her direction. I had instantly scowled at the professor, but forgave him easily, seeing as he had forgotten about the new human student. He won't be making that mistake again. She actually isn't the only human being in our pack. There are 2 other human families living here, and they both know our secret. We had trusted them enough to tell them, and they vowed to my father that they shall never speak a word about us. They still have kept their word to this day. In our school, there are 3 humans, excluding the new one who has captured my interest since the very beginning. One of them is graduating this year with me, while the other 2 are sophomores. Anyway, all this week I had been observing her, and there really isn't much to say about her. She is quite the puzzle, and my wolf keeps urging for us to get to know her better. But he knows I can't. It will ruin my reputation. I know it sounds cruel for me to say, but if I were to get acquainted with her, I would never hear the end of it from the rest of the pack members. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps coming up the staircase and towards my room. The footsteps stopped before the door and a knock was heard. I could easily smell the scent of Ethan, and I approached the door with a nervous hand. As I opened it, I was greeted by a smiling Ethan. I didn't bother to smile in return. I had other things on my mind. Especially her. "You ready for this, dude?" he asked cheerfully. I frowned at his mood. If only he knew how stressful this event was for me. I didn't answer and simply shrugged. Looking past him. He immediately understood and nodded. That's the good thing about Ethan. He knows exactly what's wrong with someone and will try the best he can to help. There's no point in lying to him because he would immediately catch it. Unlike his annoying sister of his. I still wonder if she was dropped in the head when she was a baby because she was definitely a handful. The only reason why you'll know that they are related is by their appearance. They both have the same dark hair and light brown eyes. The only difference is that Ethan is someone I can actually cope with. He reached out and patted my shoulder. His way of comforting someone. Don't worry. Man. Tonight's your night. You just let it flow, and everything will fall into place. I rolled my eyes. Easy for you to say. You're not going to be forced to find your mate by your wolf, and you will not be taking a high position in the next few years. He chuckled at my childish behavior. Aren't you forgetting that I'm being announced beta when you become alpha? I had to admit. He had a point. Lucky for him. Ethan had already found his mate within the pack when he had turned 16. He didn't know of the pressures of waiting to find your mate. Especially when you were a person like me. But like he just said. He is going to be my beta once I take the alpha position. It was really hard to choose which person will become the second most powerful wolf in the pack. Seeing as I have two best friends. But Alex was quick to step back and hand the position over to Ethan. He was a very intelligent guy. But he never took anything seriously. Once. We were playing out in the woods, in our wolf forms for the first time. And he had accidentally fallen over a steep hill and cut his hind leg wide open. The bone could be seen and everything. Instead of crying out in pain. He simply just laughed. I swear he had problems. But you couldn't help but love the guy. Let's go. Your mom would make a scene if you don't get downstairs this instant. And besides, it's almost time. He had a point. My mother was one of those people who went insane if you never got to a place on time. And I didn't want to be standing in the middle of the crowd with her screaming at me. I had no doubt in my mind that even though I came downstairs right now, she would scold about my appearance. I had settled for a light gray t-shirt, dark jeans and Converse. I was going to be shifting anyway, so what was the point in dressing up? We made our way downstairs, and I was instantly greeted by many welcoming smiles and respectful bows. I may not be the alpha yet. But I was still next in line for the position. I looked around the crowd. Trying hard to find if she had even made it to the party. My father had informed me that he had invited them since they were part of our territory now. It was really a disappointment to see that she was nowhere to be seen, and I hadn't smelled her scent since the first guest arrived. In a way, I was happy she wasn't here. How do you think a human would react if they were to see me run to the woods at the stroke of midnight? And emerge as a big black wolf? Yeah. I don't think I'd be hearing from her or her father anytime soon if they had decided to come tonight. As we crossed the large clock that my mother seemed to adore more than me, I noticed that I still had 15 minutes before midnight. We walked outside where the rest of the pack was, and I was instantly bombarded with 1,000 questions from the one person who was worrying about this night more than me. My one and only mother. Where were you? The guests began to arrive almost an hour ago. It is not alpha-like to arrive so late. Is that what you're wearing? Couldn't you have at least dressed up for this special night? How do you think your mate will react when she sees you in this attire? I rolled my eyes at her. She really was quite a handful. My mother was literally a foot shorter than I was, and I had to look down at her. She had light brown hair and hazel brown eyes that were now glaring up at me. I may tower over her easily, but she always made me feel like I was just a few inches tall whenever she looked at me like that. "Hello to you too, Mother," I said sarcastically as I gave her a kiss on her delicate cheek. As I pulled away, a man that looked like the older version of myself appeared beside her. He wrapped an arm around her waist securely before planting a kiss on her head. "Relax, Lucia. You're making the boy more nervous than he already is." My father gave me an apologetic look, but I simply shrugged. What else would I expect from her? "Are you ready?" I nodded and gave them the best smile I could fabricate. I didn't know if it was convincing, but I didn't want to seem like a coward in front of my pack. I was meant to lead them one day, and showing any signs of weakness would be futile. With a nod of his head, he led my mother away, who was still shooting daggers in my direction. Great. I will not hear the end of it once I made it back home later on tomorrow. Well, that's if my mate wasn't so far away. She's not. Oh. Son always when my wolf decides to come out of nowhere and respond. He had been quiet all week without uttering a single word to me. I could always feel his agitation as he awaited for this day to finally arrive. And now that it already has, he was more unsettling than ever. "Calm down. You're making me more nervous than I already am," I scolded at him. I could feel him smirk at me before he went back to his wordless self. Man, my wolf could be stubborn sometimes. With that, I felt him growl inside me, and all I could do was smile. He really did act like a child when he wanted to. Snapping out of my thoughts, I felt two slender arms slither their way around my neck, and I couldn't help but wince at the contact. Where the hell did she come from? Claudia, who was wearing a tight red dress that clung to her body and was nearly exposing her long legs a little too much for my liking, was now pressed against me and giving me a wet kiss on the cheek. I tried my best to not look disgusted at the gesture, but even Ethan could see how much I was struggling in her tight grasp. All he did was laugh silently beside me. What a friend he was. "Marcus, I have been looking all over for you." I smiled weakly. Man, her voice was annoying. How in the world did Ethan put up with her all these years? This girl had to be one of the most irritable females in the entire pack. I mean, I did have practically all the unmated females drooling at my feet without even trying. But she was the most persistent one of them all. I had even heard from some of the few pack members that she had personally went up to every girl that would say hi to me and told them that I was hers. How in the world could I be hers if my wolf never even recognized her as a contender? And trust me, I have actually given her a chance and tried to see if I felt any connection with her. But it was simply hollow. The only thing I felt towards her at this moment was annoyance and irritation. Can't this girl ever give up? As if on cue, I felt her loosen her grasp around my neck and move away from me. But to my surprise, she wasn't moving away by choice. She was being forced to. As I turned to look at her, I noticed that Alex had appeared out of the blue and pulled her away from me. He now had her pressed against him and secured her by wrapping his arms around her waist. She struggled against his grasp with an irritable expression. "Alex, let go of me." I couldn't help but chuckle at her protest. Like he was ever going to do as she asked. Alex was quite the womanizer, and he always had his eyes set on Claudia. Why? I have no idea. I'm telling you. I have no idea what goes on in that boy's head. Anyway. Ever since he noticed that Claudia was attracted to me our junior year and I was clearly not interested, he always pulled her away at the perfect times. I owed this kid my life for saving it. Who knows how many times. Before because of this chick in front of me. Then again. Alex was the type that he would go for any girl in the pack. I wouldn't even be surprised if he had already slept with Claudia. As if hearing my thoughts. An evil smile played at his lips as he leaned his chin against her shoulder. She was still thrashing about, but he didn't even seem to notice. Ah. The perks of being a male wolf. But I wasn't surprised why many girls would play along with Alex's games. He was a handsome young man. He had light brown hair and blue eyes. His tan skin was fair and he tended to get all the girls he wanted. Even if they still wanted to be with me. What's wrong, sugar? I thought you wanted to be with me. He cooed against her ear. Her expression was priceless. Ew. I don't want to be with you. Now, let me go, you pervert. Suddenly. A loud piercing noise erupted from the microphone. The sound was a lot louder to our sensitive ears. But we all still looked towards the end of the backyard where my dad now stood on the small platform that some of the pack members had assembled earlier in the day. He gave us all an apologetic look before his eyes landed on me. With a swift movement of his hand, he motioned for me to come forward. It was now or never. Now. I couldn't decide who was more persistent, Claudia or my wolf who decided to be a jackass this past week when I needed him the most. The crowd parted, leaving a narrow path for me to take with Ethan right behind me. I stepped onto the platform and stood beside my father. My mother was on his other side, who had a bright smile on her face. Man, she's a moody woman. My father gave me a tight squeeze on my right shoulder before he turned to the crowd. Welcome all. Tonight is the night where my son finally turns 18. With that, the crowd erupted into a mixture of applause and whistles as the pack gave me bright smiles. I tried to smile in return. But I'm pretty sure it looked forced if anyone were to be standing right in front of me. Beside me stood Ethan, who gave me a reassuring smile the second he sensed my nervousness. He knew me better than anyone, which is why I had chosen him to be my beta. He leaned forward and whispered above the screaming crowd. Just relax, man. Let your wolf take over when the time comes. He'll know what to do. He's right, you know. I swear. My wolf had the most random moments to come forth and speak. But Ethan was right. For us alphas, when it's already midnight, our wolves take over and follow the scent of our mates, no matter where they may be around the globe. As the crowd settled down, my father cleared his throat beside me. There is only a few minutes left before midnight. May my son be safe on his travels as he brings us home our next Luna. The crowd erupted into another round of applause in front of me. I couldn't help but notice the eagerness in their eyes as my father said those words. They all knew that I would become alpha one day. But they didn't know who would be their next Luna. Just like the alpha, the Luna had to be a strong wolf who can look after her pack and attend to them if they ever needed her. Our mate would do just that. How do you know? You haven't even met her yet. I may not have met her yet. But she must be our mate for some reason. Why would the goddess give us a weak mate if she couldn't attend a Luna's duties? He had a point there. The goddess did pair every wolf with a significant other that would make them a better wolf. Inside and out. Being the alpha's mate meant that you would be bestowed many duties and you have to be a strong wolf in order to fulfill that role. Suddenly, as if a mental clock in my head told me so, I slowly felt myself losing control of my human form, and my wolf stepped forward. I closed my eyes, taking deep breaths as a strong scent filled my nose. It smelled of cinnamon and a hint of mint. It had to be the most mouth-watering scent I have ever smelled in my entire life. I snapped my eyes open, having no doubt that my eyes were pitch black since my wolf had already taken over. I turned my head south and was not surprised to see that my parents and Ethan had stepped back to give me enough space for when I shifted. Without a second thought, I launched myself in the air as I shifted into my wolf. The only sound that was heard was the tearing of my clothing as I shifted. I didn't bother to look back to see the shreds. I instead allowed my wolf to take over as his paws collided with the earth below, barely making a sound. As the distance between the pack house and I increased, I could hear the faint groans of females as they realized that neither of them would be the next Luna. My wolf snickered at the thought, immediately telling me that he never thought of them as worthy enough to be our mate. Especially not Claudia. I couldn't have agreed more. I do admit that they were all beautiful in their own way. But never had I ever envisioned them standing beside me as I ruled the pack once I became alpha. My wolf gracefully dodged every tree as we made our way through the forest. The night was clear, and there was barely a full moon in the sky. It provided us with the light we needed as we made it through the dark forest of our territory. It wasn't long until we sensed the end of it and we were now in no man's land. This was where the rogues would run about. I would not be surprised if some would come out of hiding to attack us the second they noticed who we were. But then again, I think they would think twice before attacking. I was now 18 and a fully powered alpha wolf, meaning that any wolf that dared to challenge us would be greeting death in the face before any attack was launched to the other. My wolf and I could sense some rogues trying hard to catch up to us, but they were no match to the speed that we were running in. They eventually gave up and went back to who knows where. The second they disappeared, I sensed another set of wolves in front of us. But I instinctively knew that they were from our neighboring pack just south of us. The wolves were on high alert and knew that I might be passing through. It was by law that every alpha alert the other territories if their heir was to turn 18. Even if their mate was to be of the same pack. A warning had to be ushered around the globe just to be on the safe side. Before this law was established, there had been many alpha heirs that were killed due to the illegal passing to another pack's territory. War had emerged after these incidents, and once these wars ended, the law was quickly established to prevent any more unwanted deaths to occur. Thank the goddess for that. The wolves around us acknowledged us by bowing their heads slightly, immediately sensing the alpha authority within me. My wolf instead shook his head, indicating that his mate was not of this pack and he was simply passing through. They immediately relaxed their bodies and went about their patrols for the night, probably informing their alpha, as well as their pack members, that I would be entering their lands. My wolf and I didn't even bother to go near their towns since there was enough land for us to pass through without being detected. I was sure that this pack would sense me, but they wouldn't do anything to stop me. They all knew that stopping an alpha wolf from finding his mate was just suicide, especially since it wasn't me who was in control at this very moment. My wolf chuckled slightly as he pushed forward, following the sweet scent of our mate. It seemed sort of familiar, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. As we exited out of the territory we were previously in, I felt my wolf quicken his speed as he dashed towards the next. He let out a loud howl that pierced the quiet night air, signaling that his mate was in this pack we were now entering. We immediately sensed the other wolves retreat and part an opening for us to enter. We eagerly dashed through the borderline of their territory, and quickly made our way to our mate. This territory was not as large as our own, but we had heard stories of how gruesome their warriors can be if one was to ever battle them. I respectively nodded towards the wolves that were patrolling the borders in acknowledgement for their strength. They returned the gesture just because it was natural for an ordinary werewolf to bow down before an alpha, even if that alpha was not their own. Feeling like an eternity had passed by, we made our way through a deserted forest where her scent was the strongest. That was odd. Why wasn't she with the rest of her pack this late at night? Was she going out for a run? At the sound of my thoughts, my wolf plunged forward, eager to protect his mate if any rogue decided to trespass the territory and harm her. He let out a loud snarl as his mind was filled with many possibilities of what may happen to her. I snapped back at him, his thoughts immediately dwindling. He might be my wolf, but I still had more power over him. Suddenly, he stopped on his tracks and sniffed the air. I could smell the hint of water somewhere near. No doubt, a small lake of some sort. He trotted slowly forward, being silent as the still night as he made his way through the trees. Her scent was intoxicating, and my wolf was urging us forward, so he can mark what was rightfully ours. But a certain scent made us stop in our tracks. We sniffed the air as we smelled the faint scent of a human mingled together with that of our mates. Was she with another human? My wolf let out a snarl at that thought and pushed us forward. It hadn't been minutes before we reached a small clearing. Craning his neck, my wolf peered over a set of bushes that blinded his line of sight. Before us stood an old-looking cabin with a familiar truck parked on its side. In front of this cabin laid a small lake with a wooden dock leading towards it. The water was still as the night and was illuminated by the moon that shone high above our heads. And that's when I saw her. She was sitting on the wooden railing of the porch with a book in her hand. She leaned her back against the column behind her as her eyes seemed focused in whatever she was reading. She wore a long-sleeved shirt with a tank top underneath and shorts. My wolf and I couldn't help but stare at her bare legs. We wanted nothing more but to feel them beneath our fingertips as we caressed her. After staring at them for quite some time, our eyes lingered to her face. She was extremely beautiful with her long, dark brown hair surrounding her heart-shaped face, and her hazel-green eyes that shined under the light of the porch. Her mouth moved silently as if reading the words from the book out loud. Just the mere sight of it put us on edge and we absent-mindedly took a step forward, the rustling of the bush leaves breaking beneath our rather large paws. Our body tensed as her head snapped up and she looked directly at us without even noticing it. We secretly hoped that she wouldn't dare to come near us. But we were proven wrong. Our little mate was stronger than she appeared to be. Stepping back slowly, we tried our best to distance ourselves away from her as much as we could, without making a sound before we turned around and ran away from her. By this point, I was slowly taking control of our body and my wolf was whimpering slightly as he felt the distance between us and our mate lengthen in size. I didn't like the sensation either. But he knew just as much as I did that she was merely a human and exposing us that quickly would probably make us lose our mate forever. And that was something neither of us looked forward to. Without even noticing, I had made us stop on our tracks, completely ignoring her scent. By the time I sniffed the air to see where she was located, it was too late. Her hazel eyes met my own and I stood there, frozen. Just the mere sight of them made my heart skip a beat. My wolf howled inside of me to run to her and mark her as his own. But how do you think that would look? An abnormally large wolf running towards a helpless girl just to bite her on the side of her neck. Well, that sounded pleasant. I took a small step forward, noticing how her body reacted to it, as she took a hesitant step away from me. He growled in agitation. He wanted her to step towards him, not away. But I reminded him how we were in our wolf form, and she was probably frightened. With that thought, he immediately urged me to move forward and soothe our frightened mate. But I couldn't. Not in my wolf form, nor in my human form. I think it'd be kind of creepy if a black wolf turned into a naked guy that she knew from school. That'd be an interesting story to tell. I tried my best to get as close to her as I could, but that only made her step away from me even more. At some point, I noticed her turn her body slightly as she prepared to make a run for it, and I couldn't help but let out a whimper in protest. She stopped midway and looked back at us, her eyes filled with pain. Was she actually deciding on coming to us? Could she feel it too? I was about to make my way towards her before she turned around abruptly and ran back to her cabin. I ran behind her, making sure to leave a small amount of distance between us so we wouldn't frighten our mate more than she already was. I could practically hear her racing heartbeat from where we stood behind the cabin as we came to an abrupt stop. My wolf whimpered as he realized that he could not comfort his mate when she needed him the most. I let out a low growl in frustration, making sure not to alarm her or wake up her sleeping father in the first floor. I paced back and forth, trying hard to figure out my next move. I knew finding my mate was going to be a difficult task, but I never knew it was going to be this difficult. In the history of werewolves, there has never been a wolf who had a human for a mate, let alone an alpha. It was just unheard of. I sat on my hind legs, looking up at the moon in question. Why did she pair me up with a human? Why me? I paced back and forth in the middle of the trees as the sky was illuminated with the sun's morning rays. It was a beautiful sight to see, but I paid it no mind. My mind was completely somewhere else. And it was all because of that human inside of that house. Don't talk about her that way. She's our mate. I stopped pacing and rolled my eyes. I was still in my wolf form, and my wolf was really starting to aggravate me. He had not stopped whimpering all night and crying out to his mate. Every little thing I would say about her would ultimately make him snap at me. The only thing he was forgetting was that she was my mate too. I let out a low growl in frustration as I laid down on the now damp ground that was filled with mildew. I had no idea what I was going to do, and I couldn't ignore the constant nagging in the back of my mind that began ever since this morning. I knew my pack was trying to get in contact with me, but I just couldn't respond. What would I tell them? That my mate was a human? That was unlikely. They were probably getting worried by now since I hadn't even once informed them of my location. But I knew they would sooner or later find out after the alpha of the pack that I was currently in told my father. Suddenly, her scent hit me hard, instinctively making me stand up on all fours. My wolf had become more alert at her scent and he was fighting his way towards the surface. It was really starting to get more difficult to calm him down. I trotted towards the nearest tree beside her cabin, making sure I was left unseen as I peered around it. I sniffed the air. my mouth watering as her scent seemed to be engulfed in the air around me. I searched the cabin's windows, trying hard to find any sort of movement inside until I saw her figure pass by the back window. My wolf inside of me jumped with glee, and I couldn't help but smile at his response. He could act like a child sometimes. I could hear her faint voice as she told her father, "I'm going to be outside, working on homework." "Okay." At those words, I immediately made my way around the area and towards the front of the house where the lake resided. I knew she wouldn't want to be anywhere near the back of the house after our little encounter last night. I sat on my hind legs as I waited patiently for my mate to step out of the house. Unlike my wolf, he was pacing back and forth inside me, trying hard to resist from taking over my body and running toward her. There was no doubt in my mind that her father owned some sort of gun and it was stored inside the cabin. I wasn't looking forward to having to remove any form of bullets from my flesh anytime soon. I shivered at the thought. When I looked up, I noticed the front door open, and out came the most beautiful girl I have ever laid my eyes on. She was wearing a loose white, long-sleeved shirt with a purple tank top under with a pair of shorts. She held a towel as well as a backpack in her hands as she made her way towards the small pebbles that surrounded the lake. When she finally reached her destination, she placed her backpack on the ground and laid the towel below her in one swift movement. I continued to watch her as she took out some books from her bag and laid them on the ground above the towel. She then settled herself on top, lying on her stomach, as she relaxed under the sun. I couldn't help but allow my eyes to linger over her body. She was wearing shorts that completely exposed her slightly pale legs, and that was driving my wolf into a frenzy. She had never worn these type of clothes before, so I assumed she only saved them for special occasions like this. If only she would wear this type of stuff more often. The other females in my pack wouldn't even compare to her. My wolf agreed with me on that. She swayed her legs back and forth in the air as she scribbled something down on her notebook furiously, her eyes concentrated on the page in front of her. I couldn't help but smile as I noticed her lips move once again as she mumbled the words she was writing down. I wonder if she even knew that she did that when she read something. I even wondered how it would feel like to kiss her lips. I shook my head, clearing my mind from the sudden lustful thoughts that began to occur. No doubt, coming from my wolf. He really needed to calm down or else I would find myself naked above her and marking her. That's not a bad thought. I scowled at my wolf and laid down on the ground as I continued to stare at her. I don't know for how long I had been lying here, but I never seemed to get tired of watching this girl. Every time I would look at her, I would discover something new that I would automatically love. Like the way she would scrunch her nose in confusion after she read something. The way she would twirl her hair in her hand when she was deep in thought. And how she would bite her bottom lip when she was furiously writing, her eyes completely focused at the task at hand. Little by little I was beginning to love this girl. And I knew absolutely nothing about her, other than the fact that she was my mate, and she so happened to be a human. I still hadn't figured out why the goddess had paired us together. But I really can't complain. After what seemed like hours of observing her, I noticed her push her body upward into a sitting position and stretch her arms upward into the air. She let out a small moan, and I couldn't help but inch closer towards her. As she stretched, her shirt had slid upwards, revealing her stomach. Her skin looked so soft and fragile, and I couldn't help but want to reach out and touch her. She packed her books inside her bag before standing up, swinging her backpack over her shoulder and grabbing the towel. She dusted it off before she made her way towards the cabin once more. My wolf whimpered in protest, hating the fact that his mate was leaving. But luck seemed to be on our side for the day. Instead of walking inside the house, she instead dropped her things on the porch and headed back out towards the lake. Her father just then opened the door with a fish pole in hand and a large bag in the other. "I'm going fishing. Rocky. Care to join me?" he called out to her. She stopped on her tracks and a disgusted face appeared on her features. She turned around slowly, her lips turning into a forced smile as she stared back at her father. "No thanks, Dad. I'm just going out for a swim. I'd rather swim with the fish than eat them." Her father rolled his eyes playfully as he made his way to the truck. "Okay, fine. Just be careful, all right? You don't know what's lurking about in these woods." My wolf and I couldn't help but roll our eyes at his words. If he only knew. "We won't let our mate get hurt while we're here." I nodded in agreement as I noticed her body stiffen. She simply nodded before looking around her, her hazel eyes desperately searching the trees. Was she looking for us? My wolf immediately became more alert, and I couldn't help but feel him pace back and forth inside of me. I could have sworn I felt him wagging his tail. "Has such a dog." He growled at that comment. I let out a wolf laugh before my eyes settled back on her. It seemed like it had been ages since the last time I saw her. And I didn't want to look away from her ever again. My wolf was a little too eager this morning as I made my way to school. He kept pacing back and forth inside me, begging for me to go faster in my Mustang. And I understood perfectly why he felt that way. Although it had only been a few hours since we last saw her, he couldn't wait to see her again. And it'd be lying if I said I didn't feel the same way. I pressed on the gas a little more as I sped down the narrow road that led to my school. My car moaned in agony. But didn't my wolf was a little too eager this morning as I made my way to school. He kept pacing back and forth inside me, begging for me to go faster in my Mustang. And I understood perfectly why he felt that way. Although it had only been a few hours since we last saw her, he couldn't wait to see her again. And it'd be lying if I said I didn't feel the same way. I pressed on the gas a little more as I sped down the narrow road that led to my school. My car moaned in agony, but didn't fight my command. It was an old Mustang, and although it had its faults and bumps here and there, I couldn't have asked for a better car. Even my father kept on insisting he'd buy me a new vehicle. But I always refused. This car and I had history together, and I wasn't going to let it go just so I can get a brand new one. I feel like I'd be cheating if I did. After a few minutes of driving, and trying to calm my wolf down, I finally made it to school. I parked my car in its usual space and shut off the engine immediately. As usual, the second I stepped outside of my car, I was bombarded by a crowd of my pack members. It wasn't a surprise to see that most of the females that seemed to continuously overwhelm me with questions weren't in front of me this time. Having enough of the burger, I placed it aside and grabbed my chemistry notebook. I was simply going to review today's lesson since there were things that I was still unclear about. I know. I'm such a nerd. Here I am, in the library. Just got out of my AP chemistry class, and I was already reviewing today's lesson. How nice. As I continued to try and comprehend my rushed handwriting, I heard the front door of the library open. That's strange. Nobody ever comes down here except me. I placed the notebook down on my lap as I tilted my head upward, trying to listen to whomever it was that just entered. I was greeted with silence until I heard the librarian's fragile voice speak. Her voice was a bit muffled since there was such a large distance between us, so I couldn't exactly hear the name of the person she was greeting. After a few moments of pointless eavesdropping, I gave up and went back to my notes. I pulled my knees towards my chest and balanced the notebook on top. As I began to relax my body and lean against the pale wall behind me, I heard the front door open and close again. Maybe the person had already left. Without a second thought, I went back to my studying, only to be interrupted by heavy footsteps heading my way. I raised my eyebrow in question. Mrs. Montgomery is not that large to create such a sound. Someone else was in here with me. My heart began to accelerate against my chest, and my breath quickened in pace. Great. My new school is exactly where fate has decided for me to die. I hope the killer makes it quick. I don't want to feel any pain as I took in my last breath. I mean, come on. What would you prefer? A slow and painful death, or a quick and painless one? I go with the second. I listened intently as the footsteps became louder. They were closer now and I would be seeing them in any second. But there was something pulling at the back of my mind. Something that made me ask myself, why was the killer heading directly to me? Why wasn't he searching each and every aisle to see if someone else was in here other than me? Maybe it was that obvious that someone would be hiding at the end of the library. Nice going, Rochelle. I held my breath as the steps slowed down in pace. This seriously felt like a horror movie where the killer creeps around the corner slowly before killing his next victim. The steps stopped, and I looked up to see dark eyes staring down at me. The second our eyes met, the butterflies in my stomach began to flutter uncontrollably, and if I thought my heartbeat was fast before, it did not compare to how it was now. I looked down at my notebook, gripping its edges with such force that my knuckles turned white. It bended awkwardly at the sides and I knew I had ruined it. Great. Time to get a new one. All because of this handsome guy, standing in front of me. I could still feel his heavy gaze on me as I tried to occupy myself with something other than him. I even tried to focus on the little ants wandering about on the floor near the wall. And yet their dark shade of color only reminded me of his eyes. What a comparison. I know. I felt him step closer, and my body tensed in response. Why in the world did this kid have this effect on me? It was just too unnatural. Rochelle. Right. My head snapped up at the sound of his voice. He had a warm smile on his full lips and I couldn't help but wonder what it felt like to kiss them. Damn it. Rochelle. Snap out of it. I nodded my head slightly before answering, in a rather shaky voice that was just plain embarrassing. Yes. His smile broadened as he took a step towards me. We have AP English together. Right. I nodded, unable to find my voice to respond. Of course we did. He had decided to sit beside me in class. Much to my surprise. I don't know why he had done that. But my goodness. How did the sound of his voice make me lose my own? It was like I was under a spell whenever he talked to me, let alone looked at me. He stood there, shoving his hands in his pockets as he moved his body back and forth on his heels. Was he nervous? Did you start the assignment yet? I nodded once again. I must look like an idiot right now. Ever since I had bumped into him last week, I was only able to respond with a nod of my head or a smile. How pathetic was that? Oh. That's good. He paused, looking up at the books beside him. Wow. He was practically as tall as the shelves themselves. Was it normal to have every guy in this school be so tall and well-built? They could be freaking models or something. They were all that handsome. Except for Marcus here. He seemed to be the most attractive of them all, and the other girls in the school seemed to take notice of that fact. Although I was surprised that not too many girls had approached him today like usual. They would all give him sideways glances. But other than that, they wouldn't even dare come near him. Had he finally told them to lay off his back? I couldn't help but smile at that thought. His gaze landed on me once more, and I felt the butterflies erupt into a frenzy once more. Was I ever going to be able to look at him without feeling this way? Which book do you recommend? I blinked a few times. Was he really asking me for help? Well, I was already used to it. Maybe this was one of those bets many guys would make on each other. The most famous one was leading the most unattractive girl in the school onto thinking he was interested, only to have him break her heart. Guess which girl that was most of the time? If not all. With a sigh, I placed the notebook back in my backpack and got up to my feet. I brushed the dirt my clothes had consumed while sitting on the floor off, his eyes never leaving me, trying my best to not meet his heated gaze. I made my way around him to look for a book I was quite fond of that so happened to be on the list. As I walked right past him, I felt some kind of electricity spark between us, and I couldn't help but jump at the sensation. I quickly walked away, trying to put as much distance between us as we could. This guy was going to make me go insane before graduation. I peered through the aisles, reading each genre that hung above them. As I passed the comedy section, I couldn't help but stop on my tracks as I caught sight of some titles that seemed to be out of place. I walked towards them, tilting my head to get a better look. A smirk escaped my lips as they all coincidentally seemed to be about werewolves. I had to admit, the stories that kept being published were starting to be idiotic. But even I, who wasn't a fan of them, I knew that they didn't belong here. Oh well. The librarian will catch it sooner or later. I turned my head lightly, only to meet familiar dark eyes. His eyebrows were pulled together in confusion as he observed me. Feeling rather uncomfortable, I turned back around and continued my search. Minutes passed before I found the book I was looking for. I pulled it out of the shelf and placed it in his hands, being rather careful not to brush my skin against his. Unfortunately for me, I could still feel the static that sparked between us no matter how hard I had tried to be cautious. I pulled away instantly, flustered to feel my cheeks burn a bright red. I seriously had to get my act together whenever I was around this guy. He stared down at the book in his hands with a raised eyebrow. Is it any good? I nodded. Yeah. It's one of my favorites. His eyes met mine and a smirk played on his lips. And so she speaks. My cheeks flamed a brighter red, and I looked away. So he had noticed. Damn it. He chuckled in front of me before tucking the book under his arm. He leaned against the metal shelves to his left as he gazed down at me. I reluctantly looked up, admiring his appearance. He had a simple white shirt with dark jeans and heavy boots that seemed to be used frequently. Was it possible for a person to look so godlike with just a simple t-shirt? "So what made you come here?" Well, that question took me by surprise. I blinked a few times before I answered. My dad got a job offer here recently. So we both moved to Black Forest. It was nothing but the truth. The simple version, I guess. He nodded. "So do you like it here so far?" I shrugged. I don't know. Did I? I wasn't exactly welcomed here, like if I was coming home to a family reunion or something. So I'm not really sure. I'm already used to the lack of attention from the students around me. So, coming here wasn't at all a surprise. I guess. I said flatly. His lips formed into a thin line as his eyebrows pulled together. Why not? His voice seemed a little bit forced. But I wasn't moved by it. Much to my surprise. I don't know. There must be a reason, he said. His voice now with a hint of impatience as he took a step closer to me. My body immediately reacted to it with a small step back. Well, I am new to this school. So I am not surprised to see that no one really talks to me. Why not? He repeated. Well, I trailed off, wondering if I should even tell him. He was the hottest senior in this school, and there was no doubt in my mind that if I told him of my advancement in school, he would simply walk away without a second glance. Everyone always did that. Well, he pressed. Man, this guy is persistent. Well, I'm a little bit more advanced than most seniors here. He looked at me. Confusion clearly seen in his angelic features. I had to admit. He looked quite adorable that way. Ugh. There I go again. Advanced. How? I took in a deep breath before answering quickly. I'm graduating a year early because I advanced a level when I got to middle school. The only thing that was heard was his heavy breathing due to the proximity of our bodies. I held my breath, waiting for the usual reaction I always received whenever I informed people of my intelligence. He stared back at me, his face expressionless. But his eyes seemed to be a different matter. Its dark shade were simply pools of emotions that were running quickly through his mind. What was all that about? After a long moment of silence, I jumped slightly at the sound of his husky, yet captivating voice. So how old are you exactly? I looked down at the ground, shifting slightly from foot to foot as I murmured, 16. I was hoping that he hadn't heard me and would simply drop it. But luck was most definitely not on my side today. Much to my dismay. 16. Wow. That's... Here it comes. That's pretty awesome. My head snapped up and I was greeted with a wide smile. Did I just hear what I think I just heard? I blinked a few times. Probably looking like an idiot. But I couldn't care less. Here, standing before me, was the hottest guy I have ever met, and he actually thought my nerdiness was awesome. Was I dreaming? Really? I couldn't help but stutter. I was still in a state of shock. Overreaction. I know. But this was the first time this ever happened to me. Cut me some slack, people. He nodded, his smile broadening to the point where he flashed me his perfect teeth. Was there anything about this guy that wasn't perfect? Yeah. Why are you so surprised about that? Well, it's not the reaction I tend to receive. He tilted his head in question. What is the usual one then? I bit my bottom lip and looked down at the floor below sheepishly. They usually make fun of me. I tend to be labeled as the nerd of the school. All of a sudden, I heard something that resembled that of a growl. I looked up at him, taking a step back as I took in his appearance. His once gentle dark eyes were now an ominous black shade. His whole body was tensed and his lips were pulled down to a frown. The second our eyes met, his whole aura changed back to its original state. His eyes were now filled with sadness as he stared down at me, for Will. It would save me the trouble from paying any medical bills in the future. Suddenly, he stopped on his tracks and turned around to face me. I had not seen that coming so before my mind could even process his actions. I found myself slamming hard against his chest. Well, this seems like déjà vu. He grabbed a hold of me, igniting sudden sparks that began to emanate between us. His eyes darkened in color. But I no longer felt intimidated by the sudden change. He pulled me closer against him, and I surprisingly found myself not fighting his grip. Instead, I took a small step forward to close any space that was still standing between us. My body molded perfectly against his as I gazed up at the face that seemed to haunt my mind since the second I met him. He leaned his head closer to mine, making it a little bit less difficult to stare at him due to his large size compared to mine. As he leaned closer, my breathing came out in heavy pants, and I wouldn't be surprised if I was hyperventilating right about now. He tilted his head to the right, his lips brushing against my skin, igniting a fire that had me straining back a moan that was desperately fighting its way out of trembling lips. He stopped beside my ear, his breath making my skin tremble at the nape of my neck. Taking in a deep breath, his body relaxed against my own as he whispered softly against my ear. Just know that I'm here to protect you. I lifted up my eyebrow in question. This guy was just full of riddles today, wasn't he? Much to my disappointment, he pulled away just then, leaving an unwelcoming cold as he made his way to one of the nearby wooden tables. He sat down, placing the book I had given him earlier in front of him before looking up and motioning with his head for me to join him. Instead of obeying his command, I was left standing at the end of the aisle with a fast-beating heart. I couldn't move, no matter how hard I tried to make myself walk towards him. My body wouldn't oblige. My mind was still racing about our heated encounter. Did he not feel the same sensation I did whenever we touched? After a few seconds of standing there, motionless, I found myself walking slowly to the seat in front of him. I sat down cautiously, avoiding making any eye contact once I felt his heavy gaze on me. It wasn't annoying. It was simply overbearing. Every time he looked at me that way, I felt self-conscious about myself, which is something I never cared about since I had entered the early stages of puberty. Why the sudden change? Of course, it was all because of him. I placed my hands on top of the table, intertwining my fingers as I stared down at them. There was a brief moment of silence before I asked quietly, "Why do you feel the need to protect me?" He didn't answer immediately, which made me look up at him. His face was expressionless, and much to my disappointment, so were his eyes. "I just feel the need to. I can handle myself," My voice was a bit harsher than before. It doesn't hurt knowing that someone wants to a life. And just because they just feel the need to. I asked, making quotation marks in the air with my fingers. I'm sorry, Mr. Popular. But I have been doing pretty well on my own before you entered the picture. What do you mean? For some reason. His expression just made me snap. Look. I know what you're doing. You may think I haven't seen it before. But I have been a victim countless of times. I don't know what the bet may be. But just tell your little buddies that you took me on a date or something. Maybe even slept with me for all I care. I stood up, nearly making the chair behind me topple over. Turning around, I made my way back to my aisle to retrieve my backpack. Hearing his footsteps close behind me because they already know. Wonder. I couldn't help but smile at that comment. I had been a little hesitant about my pack knowing about my mate the day before. But with a little encouragement of Ethan and the demands from my wolf, I allowed my father to inform the pack. To say they were surprised was a complete understatement. And I could tell they were still stunned by the news from the expressions I was receiving all around the parking lot. I ignored their stares, and was immediately greeted by two familiar faces I have grown up with. Hey! Mark! You ready for today? Ethan asked. An underlying meaning laced in his words. I nodded, taking a look around before settling my eyes on Alex, who was glaring at me. What was all that about? As if reading my thoughts. He answered. Thanks for filling me on you finding your mate. Alpha. He exaggerated. That's right. I had accidentally forgotten to tell him about it. He had to find out along with everybody else. I mean, I know I'm not your beta or anything. But it hurts not hearing it from you personally. He continued, placing a hand over his heart in an overly dramatized way. I rolled my eyes at him. Alex was definitely back. Sorry. Man. Yesterday was a hectic day for me. Sure it was. Mr. Alpha. You have more important duties than telling your best friend the news. I get it. He said sarcastically. I couldn't help but laugh at his childish nature. He could be quite a handful sometimes. I don't know how his mate is going to put up with him once he finds her. At that exact moment, Ethan's mate, Sarah, walked up to us, bowing her head in my direction before she wrapped her arms around Ethan's neck. He kissed her genuinely as he pressed her body against his. I had to admit, I was a little jealous about him at the moment. Sarah was quite beautiful and extremely down to earth. She had long blonde hair and bright green eyes. Her skin was fair and she was quite small like most of the other females in our pack. But she doesn't compare to our mate. Weiss. I had to agree with him on that. Just then, Ethan pulled away, an arm still remaining around Sarah's waist as he faced me. He gave me a knowing look before he motioned with his head to the school entrance. Come on. I know what it feels like to not be with your mate for a long time. Sarah giggled beside him before we made our way to the entrance, with Alex constantly complaining along the way. Great. Now I have lost my other bro just because he found his mate. What am I supposed to do now? He pushed out his lower lip as he started to whimper. You could always mess around with Claudia to get her off my back. Beside me there was a gagging sound as I said those words. No doubt Ethan. He may dislike his sister, but hearing anything about somebody doing things to her always made him feel awkward. I looked to my right to find Alex looking up at the ceiling in a thoughtful manner. You know, that's not a bad idea. I haven't messed with her in a while. He wiggled his eyebrows as a smirk spread across his lips. Ugh. Can you guys just stop it already? She's my sister, for crying out loud. Sarah laughed beside him as she wrapped her arm around his. We laughed along with her until her scent struck me hard. I stopped on my tracks and sniffed the air around me. My eyes immediately snapped forward, and that's when I saw her. My wolf howled with joy at the sight of her, and I couldn't help but smile at his reaction. Our mate was going through her locker. No doubt, preparing her stuff for the day. With a troubled expression on her face. She wore a loose black shirt with a purple tank top underneath, accompanied with light jeans and black flats. She looked absolutely beautiful. Especially with her hair hung loosely around her shoulders. The best thing about her was the lack of makeup on her face. She was completely natural, and that's what made her stand out against all the other females in this school. I could stare at her all day and never grow tired of her evident beauty. Unfortunately for me, I wasn't the only one who noticed it. My wolf growled territorially, deep inside me. Fighting for control of my body the second I noticed a group of unmated male werewolves eyeing her. I could sense my eyes were switching from a darker shade to its original color rapidly. And Ethan and Alex immediately noticed it as well. They took a step back. Which was a wise thing to do, seeing that alpha wolves tend to be a lot more protective of their mates compared to ordinary werewolves. My wolf desperately wanted to be let out as he continuously snapped at me for protesting. The way they eyed her body with hungry eyes was setting me on edge. I could feel my body trembling with anger, and I couldn't help but ball my hands into fists. It was getting harder now to control him. And I was close to allowing him do as he pleased. The only thing that stopped me was the fact that our mate was standing a couple of feet away, and she had no idea that werewolves even existed. And yet, here were these idiots eyeing her down, and she was completely oblivious about it. Before I lost control, I let out a warning growl that any wolf in the hallway would be able to hear. It was low, yet firm. And I wanted nothing more than to claw their throats out after the way they looked at their future Luna. It was completely disrespectful, and there was no way I would let it go unpunished. Their eyes immediately met my own the second they heard my growl. They must have seen the anger boiling up inside of me and the way my wolf was close to the surface, because they immediately looked down at the floor. And I could hear murmurs of their apologies in my mind. Without another word, they made their way down the hall towards where she was standing. But never daring to look at her as they passed. Good choice. If they were in their wolf forms, I wouldn't be surprised to see their tails hidden between their hind legs after they walked away in humiliation. I had to come up with a punishment for them later. Right now, all I wanted to know was if my mate was all right. When I looked up, I was surprised to see that she was no longer standing in front of her locker. I sniffed the air and caught a whiff of it heading in the direction of our homeroom. Why was she going to class so early? Just then, the bell rang, and I instantly knew the reason behind her disappearance. I looked down at my watch and sighed. It was already 7:30. I guess that little commotion that occurred took a little bit longer than I thought. I felt a hand rest on my shoulder, and I looked back at Ethan. Come on. Let's go. We don't want to be more late than we already are. I nodded in response and watched as Sarah and Alex made their way to class. They both had homeroom together after Alex had transferred into her class recently. And Ethan had made it extremely clear that Alex would protect her at all costs. It was the only class they didn't have together and he hated that fact. If he only knew what I was going through. We walked down the hallway and towards our homeroom before I searched for one of our pack members in my mind. The second I felt his presence, I immediately asked him politely if he can switch seats with me for the time being. And I was glad to hear him agree immediately with no questions asked. His name was Jared and he wasn't that popular in our pack. Probably due to the fact that he wasn't that built like most of us were. But nonetheless, he was a pretty nice guy and I would greet him every time I got the chance to. When we entered the class, I wasn't surprised to see Mr. Johnson already behind his desk, scribbling something on the board. He didn't even turn around to acknowledge us. Instead, he bowed his head slightly without stopping. Those were the perks of being future alpha and beta of the pack. If we were to come late to a class, our teachers wouldn't mind because of their assumption that we were off doing something important. Which wasn't a lie most of the time. There will be incidents where my father will contact Ethan and I, causing us to leave without a single word to take care of a rogue situation. We hadn't had any for quite some time now. But those patrolling will never once let their guard down. They were only putting their pack in danger if they ever did. Which is why they all had different shifts, so our best werewolves wouldn't get tired out. Ethan made his way toward his seat, giving me a knowing look before sitting down. He obviously had noticed that Jared was now occupying my seat instead of the vacant one right beside the dark-haired beauty. I sat down, a smile spreading across my lips as I inhaled her scent. This is the closest I have been to her in quite some time and my wolf and I couldn't be more happier at the proximity. The second I sat down, I noticed her body tense. I could hear her breathing come out in heavy pants as her heartbeat accelerated. So she did notice the effect I had on her. From the corner of my eye, I saw her turn her head a fraction of an inch as she stared at me. The look on her face when I caught her in the act was quite adorable if you ask me. As I sent her a bright smile, I noticed a hint of red spread across her cheeks. She smiled shyly in return before looking down at her notebook. She proceeded to scribbling down nonsense on the cover of her notebook. And I couldn't help but smile as I noticed her hand was now shaking. As I turned away to listen to the lesson for the day, I could feel my wolf growl at me slightly. He hated the fact that we were no longer looking at our mate. But I couldn't just stare at her for the rest of the period, regardless of the fact that she seemed to sense the effect I had on her. I would only seem like a stalker of some sort. As I stared at the front of the class, I continuously felt a pair of eyes on me. I knew the other pack members were giving me sideways glances every so often. But there were particular ones that didn't seem to look away. My wolf growled menacingly towards her, and immediately feel her eyes look away and focus elsewhere. Didn't she know that I had already found my mate and she wasn't her? What kind of obsession does this girl have with me? I felt my blood begin to boil beneath my skin and it was hard to contain my wolf. Why might you ask? From the corner of my eye, I noticed my mate tense suddenly and fidget in her seat. I stared at her worriedly before I turned around and a low snarl escaped my throat. It was low enough for her not to hear. But the other pack members heard it clearly. They all jumped in unison. Especially Claudia. Her eyes widened in fear before she averted her gaze. How dare she stare at her future Luna in that manner? My wolf immediately agreed, and wanted to put that little b times tch in her rightful place. It was finally lunch hour. And yet I couldn't take my eyes off her as she stood in the lunch line. Surprisingly enough, the meatballs they were serving today were pretty appetizing. We may be a werewolf pack, but the school lunch was still disgusting. As I looked at her grab a veggie burger, I couldn't help but tilt my head in wonder. Why wasn't she getting the meatballs? I continued to watch her until she left the lunchroom. Something she always did since the day she arrived last week. I understood why, since the rest of the pack hadn't welcomed her too fondly since she was a human. But that was all about to change. She was my mate. Their future Luna. And they will treat her as such. The table I was sitting at was buzzing with noise as they all talked to each other. Despite our sensitive hearing, everyone still talked loudly as if the person next to them was across the room. I guess teenagers will be teenagers no matter what. I was staring into space before I felt a familiar pair of eyes land on me. I didn't bother to look at him as he asked through our mind link. "You okay? You making frets?" I shook my head in response, not caring if anyone saw the gesture. There was a moment of silence, but his eyes still remained focused on my figure. I began to feel rather uncomfortable under his gaze and was about to snap at him until I heard his voice in my mind once more. "Go to her. I could tell you don't want to be here." 1. My wolf nodded in agreement before he urged me to follow her. Wherever she may be. I turned to him and smiled, grateful that he understood me with just a simple look. He returned the gesture before looking back at Sarah. The love I saw in his eyes was evident. As she looked back at him, her eyes were filled with the same amount of love. I couldn't help but wonder if she'll ever look at me that way. Of course she will. She's our mate. Now, let's go. I felt him nudge me inside my mind. And I couldn't help but wince. Man, this wolf was persistent. I immediately heard him chuckle in the back of my mind. I stood up and made my way to the entrance, feeling a few stares bore onto my back. But I paid it no mind. The second I stepped out of the cafeteria, her scent overwhelmed me. I took in a deep breath, feeling my body instantaneously relax. After a few moments of breathing in her scent, I began to follow it, consistently sniffing the air to make sure I was heading in the right direction. I passed by the library, only to stop abruptly the second her scent faded. I took a step back and stood in front of the double doors. I sniffed the air and smiled, sensing her presence inside. If I wouldn't have sensed her, the sensation of my wolf jumping in delight would have alarmed me. I opened the door, her scent surrounding me and making me growl in pleasure. I walked forward, greeting the librarian. "Mrs. Montgomery." She bowed respectfully before looking back to the computer. I made my way towards her desk and leaned against it, giving her the best pleading expression I could make at the moment. "Yes, Marcus." Her voice was low and fragile due to her age, but her gray eyes contained nothing but wisdom. "I assume you already know." She stared at me for a brief moment before she nodded in understanding. "Do you mind giving us some privacy? I hope she doesn't go off and ask too many questions." To my relief, she simply smiled and nodded. She picked up her bag that was under her computer before making her way around the desk. Bowing at me once more, she exited the room quietly. The second I knew she had placed a good amount of distance between the library and herself, I spun around and made my way towards her. following her scent. I found myself heading to the back of the library, where it seemed to be the strongest. I turned the corner, my breath catching in my throat as my eyes met hers. I continued to chew on my veggie burger, making a disgusted face as I swallowed. I have tasted veggie burgers that were 1,000 times better than this one. Oh well. I am in school after all. And there was no way in hell I was going to eat those nasty meatballs. How can people eat that stuff? You're eating a precious animal, for crying out loud. How would you like it if animals started eating humans? Well, they do out in the wild if they feel intimidated. Never mind. Rocky. What are you even talking about? His voice was laced with confusion and desperation. And I hated the way my body reacted as he said my nickname. I bit my bottom lip as I felt the tears begin to blur my vision. I didn't need this right now. The one guy I thought could possibly be different was just like the others. This is what I get for wishful thinking. I turned around, glaring at his large figure that was preventing me from exiting the aisle in peace. I get it. Mess with the new girl who is a complete nerd. Only to make her feel more humiliated than she's ever been. His eyes suddenly were filled with anguish. He reached out a hand towards me, but I instinctively took a step back. Rocky. I wasn't doing anything that. Of course you weren't. Mr. Popular is always the innocent one, and he never does anything wrong. For your information, I have enough humiliation and embarrassment from my previous schools to last me a lifetime. I don't need any more of this bull, sh*t. Feeling a tear escape my eye, I took the chance to walk around him, relieved to find that he wasn't about to stop me. No matter how much it pained me to walk away from him now, I just couldn't face it anymore. Just the situation that made all the memories flood back into my mind. No matter how badly I tried to build a wall up that prevented any of these memories to come back to haunt me. Here I was, my body shaking uncontrollably just because of this one guy I met only a week ago. For some reason, just the mere thought of him hurting me was a lot more painful than the others. As I reached the door, I felt the same electrical charge surge through my body as his hand gripped my arm. I tried to pull away, but I was no match for his strength. He pulled me back towards him as he reached out his other hand to turn my face so I could look at him. But I didn't dare allow him to do so. Rocky. Rochelle looked at me. Reluctantly, I turned back to him. The second my eyes met his own, his eyes seemed to mirror the same pain I was feeling inside. I shook my head, a sob escaping my throat. Just leave me alone, I whispered. With that, he released his grip on me, allowing me to exit the library. As the doors closed behind me, the bell rang, signaling the end of the lunch hour. As I made my way to my second English class, I couldn't help but fight the tear that escaped my left eye. This had to be the worst day of my life, and I didn't even know why. It was finally the end of the day, and I wanted nothing more than to just go home and forget this day had ever happened. As I stepped through the main entrance of the school, I could practically feel all eyes on me. But I immediately ignored them as I made my way through the parking lot. They could stare at me all they want, but it wasn't going to make me feel any better. This was the main reason why I had gotten myself in that advanced program all those years ago. Just to be able to graduate school early and live the rest of my life in peace. Even if it did mean some embarrassment here and there. As I finally exited the parking lot, I couldn't help but let my mind wander back to what happened in the library earlier today. I had to admit, I think I may have overreacted back there. But something inside of me just snapped. The urge to open up and pour my heart out to this complete stranger that captivated me from the very beginning was simply frightening. I wanted to tell him all the pain I had endured from all the different schools I have gone to and how much I wanted him to take it all away. To simply diminish it into thin air and refuse for any horrid memory to enter back into my subconscious. But just the mere thought of him being the one to cause me the most pain simply killed me inside. It automatically made me shut down and push him away. No matter how difficult it turned out to be. The mere expression he had on his face when I told him to leave me alone nearly killed me. It tore me to pieces. And yet, I managed to walk away from it all. So here I am now, entering the front entrance to my home and glad that my dad was working late tonight. He hadn't finished some paperwork before the weekend due to the whole party thing and his boss letting everyone out early. So that meant more alone time for me. Which was really needed actually. I made my way upstairs, fighting the tears that were struggling to break free from my eyes. I took in several breaths, closing the door behind me as I allowed my backpack to fall against the hardwood floor. I took a few steps towards my bed before an overwhelming surge of pain enveloped my chest. My hand instinctively went over my heart, trying hard to dull the pain with little success. For some reason, the pain this time was a lot more difficult to handle than it used to be. It was as if my pain was doubled for some unknown reason. I clutched at my chest as the tears streamed down my face, a sob escaping my lips, but I didn't care. All I wanted was to be alone and cry my heart out. This town was making me feel insane and emotional. I wasn't even on my period for crying out loud. I buried my face against my soft pillows, allowing my tears to soak them. I needed to wash them anyway. Tears wouldn't make a difference. I don't know for how long I remained lying there. But after a while, my sobs had dwindled and all I could hear was the dead silence of the room. I lifted up my head slowly, feeling a bit lightheaded from the lack of oxygen I had received. Wiping the tears away from my cheeks, I made my way towards the bathroom. Turning on the faucet, I splashed cold water on my face, wincing as the chill of the liquid stung my burning cheeks. As I looked up at the mirror lying before me, I couldn't help but notice how my eyes were bright red and my face was all puffy looking. This is why I hated crying. I just looked plain horrible. After drying my face, I walked back to my backpack that was lying beside my desk and took out my math notebook. I hated math, but never once found it that difficult to me. The homework was due on Friday, but I had to do something to distract my mind. Even through the silent tears, I still thought about him. He was the cause of my emotional breakdown and yet he was the only thing on my mind. I sat on my bed, laying my notebook in front of me before looking at the picture of my mom, Dad and I on my night table. I reached out and grabbed it, a smile immediately spreading across my lips at the sight. I had to admit, I really did miss her. It was times like these that she would have been perfect to talk to. Dad, on the other hand, was just glad that I had had that whole sex education class before he had to speak about the topic personally. Even I was glad I didn't need to hear it from him. Placing the picture frame back in its place, I grabbed my notebook and sat on the window seat. I had actually discovered that I was able to concentrate a whole lot better there than if I was sitting on my desk. Go figure. Resting my back against the wall behind me, I peered out at the forest in front of me. Even with the skies becoming a hue of gray, the forest still looked beautiful. Ominous, but beautiful nonetheless. Before looking away, I noticed a dark figure emerge from the trees down below. I gave it a quick glance before looking back down at my notebook. A few seconds passed before my head snapped back at the figure. My eyes widened in surprise as I analyzed the rather large creature. It was staring right at me with its oddly familiar dark eyes. I sat there, frozen, my mouth hanging open as I continued to stare down at the wolf who seemed to follow me everywhere. This was the third time since I came here that I had ever encountered this wolf. Was that normal? For some strange reason, the longer I continued to stare at it, the more my body urged me to head downstairs and eliminate any distance between us. Here was an enormous wolf in my backyard, probably thinking of killing me for dinner. And all I wanted to do was go to it. Only me. Staring down at the wolf, I took in a deep breath before placing the notebook in front of me and rushing downstairs. I don't know what I was doing, but I was simply going with my gut that was telling me that there was nothing to fear from this wolf. Somehow, despite the obvious position on the food chain based on strength and ability, the wolf had no intention of hurting me, which puzzled me to say the least. I walked through the dining room and opened the back door wide, stopping halfway as I noticed how the wolf had managed to come closer to the house on my way over here. I breathed in slowly, cautious not to make any sudden movements that might frighten the animal. Here I was thinking that I may scare it off, and yet it was twice as big as me. Maybe even 3 times my size. This wolf was a lot larger than the ones I have seen on Animal Planet. So it always made me wonder what the heck they were feeding these wolves. There must be someone taking care of them and giving them steroids or something. This was just not normal. Seeing that the wolf had no interest in taking another step towards me, I closed the door quietly and made my way towards the wall beside the glass doors. Leaning against it, I allowed my body to slide down to the dry grass below. I know what you're thinking. Why am I not just running back inside and calling animal control to inform them of this large beast standing in my backyard? To be honest, I have no clue. The second I sat down, the wolf mimicked my actions by lying down, its eyes still trained on me. As I continued to stare at them, I couldn't help but notice how blue they seemed to be, and I don't mean their color either. It appeared to be rather sad and miserable, as its gaze remained on me. I wanted to simply go to it and comfort it and apologize. Why did I want to apologize to an animal? Okay. Now, I'm getting worried. I tilted my head to the side and observed its magnificent beauty. Its fur was pitch black and sparkled in the little sunlight that escaped through the clouds that hovered above. It rustled slightly in the wind, making me want to run a tender hand through it. The thought made me ball my hands into fists, so I could prevent myself from reaching out my hand. I knew I wouldn't be able to touch him since he was a few feet away from me, but I still couldn't help but wonder if it would actually allow me to stroke its fur. Before I knew it, I had fallen asleep against the wall of the house, completely unguarded in front of this magnificent creature. I was sleeping soundly before I heard something move somewhere near from where I currently sat. Opening my eyes slowly, I stared up at the sky, only to notice that it was now a darker shade of gray, and there was no doubt that there might be some rain tonight. I stretched my body out to the side, only to stop the second my forearm touched something soft. I turned to my left, a gasp catching at my throat as I noticed a dark figure beside me. It was already dark outside, so it was a bit difficult to see. I allowed my eyes to adjust, taking deep breaths to calm down my rapid heart. After a few moments, I turned back to the creature, only to find myself smiling down at it. It must have crept up beside me when I was sleeping, and now its body was pressed up against mine. If I thought it looked huge from a distance, it was nothing compared to how it appeared now. Its back rose and fell slowly as it took deep breaths. Its back was the same height as my shoulders in the sitting position I was in. I wonder how big it was when it was standing. Its dark fur nearly resembled the night, making it easy to camouflage with its surroundings. Without hesitation, I reached out my hand and stroked the ends of its fur. For some strange reason, I felt some sort of spark between the wolf and I, which brought me to rest my hand completely on its back involuntarily. I stroked its fur leisurely, relishing the texture that was felt between my fingers. It reminded me of a soft pillow that one would love to snuggle with every night, like a teddy bear. As I continued to repeat these actions, I laid my head against it, letting out a soft sigh before snuggling against this large beast. And that was when I heard it. A low growl erupted from its chest, bringing me to sit up straight. I turned my head towards his, only to find that it was already staring at me from the side. Its eyes were a complete shade of black, but I sensed no danger as it continued to stare at me. Instead, I found myself lying my head back on its side without an ounce of fear. It growled lowly against me once more, but I paid it no mind. Without a second thought, I snuggled deeper against it, allowing myself to get comfortable against its soft fur. It felt like heaven, and I never once ignored the static that seemed to spark between us whenever I touched him. It seemed so familiar, but my mind was too tired to even wonder where I had once sensed this before. My eyes began to close slowly. No matter how hard I tried to fight the sleep that wanted to consume my body, it was becoming difficult. But I craved to spend more time with this wolf that seemed to follow me around. I didn't want to leave its side. All I wanted was to feel its touch and stay with it forever. But much to my dismay, I lost the battle. I was woken up by the sound of the front door opening downstairs. I rubbed my eyes as a low sigh escaped my lips when I felt the soft bedspread beneath me. Wait! Wasn't I just outside? I sat up straight, looking all around only to realize that I was now in my room. Everything was exactly the way I had left it. Nothing had been moved. I was still wearing the same clothes I had worn earlier today, with my notebook still lying idly on the window seat. But my mind drew up a blank as to how I even got up here in the first place. As I made my way to my dresser to grab my nightwear, I tried hard to recall what had happened earlier. The last thing I could recall was falling asleep beside the large wolf in the backyard. And then, nothing. I had magically appeared in my room without any memory of coming up here. Had the whole wolf encounter been nothing but a dream? But how can it be? If I would have fallen asleep while doing my math homework, I would have found myself on the window seat. And besides, I had never been one to sleep for such a long period of time in any uncomfortable place. My body would eventually send me a signal to wake the hell up. I lied back down on my bed, pulling the covers over me and frowning. My body felt so cold. Too cold. Even beneath these dense sheets, my body seemed to tremble under the evident heat the sheets provided. Not like how I felt lying beside the wolf back downstairs, and I found myself craving its warmth. which actually surprised me. I had felt safe against it. And it just felt right. It was like I belonged there. Like if I were to ever leave its side, I would lose my other half. And that is exactly what I was feeling right now. Emptiness. I curled up into a ball underneath the sheets, closing my eyes and allowing sleep to consume me once more. The last thing I remembered was seeing a pair of familiar eyes in front of me before I fell into a dreamless sleep. She looked so peaceful in her sleep. Her worried lines had smoothed away and her lips were spread into a soft smile. I wish I could know what she was dreaming. If she was dreaming at all. She knows we're here. What? I tilted my head in question, as I silently made my way towards the bed. I wasn't worried about her father walking in on me. He had fallen asleep the second he had walked into the house without checking up on her. It was completely understandable. And better on my part. I wasn't looking forward to explaining why there was a half-naked young man standing in his daughter's closet. That would have been entertaining, he said, chuckling lightly as he envisioned the scene for me. I frowned. He was always looking for ways to get me in trouble. Especially since I was the one who was walking around our pack instead of him. Damn dog. I kneeled beside the bed where she was facing and smiled when I noticed her take in a deep breath and let it out slowly. Even though she was human, it was easy to see that she could still sense us near her. Her body was probably reacting the same way a werewolf's would if their mate was near. Mate. Just the mere word brought me so much happiness now that I had discovered my mate. I didn't care if she was human. She made me feel so alive when I was with her. Despite the whole incident we had earlier today, I was still puzzled why she had reacted in that manner. Whatever she was accusing me of were clearly not my intentions. I just wanted to get to know her. But it had gone downhill the second I turned the corner of that aisle. Things would be a whole lot easier if she knew my secret. She was practically living in it, and she had absolutely no clue. But that will change soon enough. I had come here right after school after seeing the pain written all over her features. It had broke my heart seeing my mate that way. Especially since I was the cause behind it. Even if it wasn't intentional. I knew I had to do something. Something to make things better between us. I could feel her slipping through my fingers even if she did feel the same way I did without her knowledge. I knew her first instinct was to run the opposite direction. But that's only because she didn't know the truth. So this is why I'm here. Looking like a stalker inside her room. Just staring down at her while she sleeps with just memories of how good it felt to feel her touch on me. Once she had fallen asleep outside her house, I had immediately made my way towards her, being careful not to wake her. The second my skin touched hers, my wolf had howled inside of me as the sparks ignited between us. I was not sure if she had felt it too until I heard her moan slightly. And just the mere sound of it aroused me. I had to fight my wolf from taking over. If I thought I was a bit horny around her, he was a completely different story. After making sure she had fallen asleep once more, I reluctantly shifted back into my human form. Shifting her body, so she could be laying down on the grass. I had quickly retrieved my shorts and rushed back to her. Feeling some sort of emptiness, the second I left. Carrying her in my arms as I made my way up the stairs and into her room. My wolf purred inside of me as her body molded against mine. She fit perfectly against me. It was like we were made for each other. Well, of course we were. That's why the goddess had made us mates. Duh. I had carefully placed her in her bed, not even bothering to change her because I knew that if I did, all hell will break loose when it came to my wolf. Making sure she was comfortable enough, I silently made my way to the closet, praying to the goddess that she wouldn't enter if she were to ever wake up again. Thankfully, luck was on my side. Seeing her shift slightly in her bed before sitting up straight made me catch my breath. I wanted nothing more than to just rush to her side and comfort her. It was clear that she was baffled at the sight of her being in her room again. But she never once questioned it as she changed into her nightwear. I had to look away for that, even if every fiber of my being told me not to. So now here I am, gazing at the most beautiful girl I had ever laid my eyes on. She was simply perfect in every way possible. I wanted nothing more than to show how much she meant to me and my wolf. And we both wanted to show her the love she deserved. She might just be human, but there was a spark in her that showed the reason why she would one day be crowned Luna of the Black Forest Pack. My wolf inside me howled with pride as he gazed down at his mate. He wanted to just hold her in his arms, but he knew very well we couldn't do such a thing. Not yet, that is. As I turned to the clock that was lying on her night table, I nearly jumped in shock. It was already 5:00 the morning, and it was a school night. Was I here for that long? I was surprised that I wasn't even tired. I stood up slowly, giving her one last look before darting out the window. It wasn't an issue that her room was in the second floor. My wolf's agility easily took care of that. Taking off my shorts in one swift movement, I shifted back into my wolf form, and grabbed my shorts in my mouth before speeding away to the pack house. It wasn't that far from hers, so it only took me about 3 minutes at full wolf speed. As I entered the backyard, I was stopped on my tracks by a figure sitting on one of the patio chairs on the deck outside. I walked slowly to it, my senses on high alert, before my heightened eyesight revealed the dark figure. I relaxed my muscles, dropping my shorts on the ground as I sat on my hind legs. I gave him my best wolf smile as I stared at him. He shook his head and laughed. He always did say I looked like a moron when I did that, but that never stopped me from doing it. Okay, lover boy. Shift back. I rolled my eyes. Ever since I announced that he would become my beta, he always thought he could boss me around. He was only older than me by a week, but he never let me live it down. I shifted back, feeling no ounce of embarrassment as I grabbed my shorts. Us male wolves were already used to that, so we always felt comfortable with each other. I know it sounds weird, but it's nothing but the truth, you know. Last time I checked, you weren't much of a morning person, I said with a chuckle. He shrugged his shoulders. Only am today, since my best friend deserted me and had his mind link blocked. He paused, analyzing me as he sniffed the air. A smile slowly spread across his lips as he playfully muttered, "Stalker." I growled at him, not once surprised at the sight of not seeing him wince at the sound. He had grown accustomed to it many years ago, so it never really fazed him unless he knew I was on the brink of allowing my wolf to take over, which was hardly ever. I sighed, running a frustrated hand through my dark hair. You know I had to. I just couldn't live with myself knowing that she was that upset without doing anything about it. He nodded in understanding. I know. You just have to be careful. She may be your mate, but she is still human as well as her father. You don't know what he may do to you. I smirked. As if he can take a guy like me. He shrugged his shoulders. A small smile playing on his lips. Doesn't hurt to be cautious. I nodded. I know. I just want her to know already. I only discovered she was my mate a few days ago, and am already going crazy with the thought of her not knowing who I really am. Heck. Who we all really are. For that matter. She's the next Luna of this pack, and she has no idea werewolves even exist. She even laughed at the whole werewolf book thing being on the comedy section of the school library. There was a moment of silence as he continued to stare at me pacing back and forth. I hadn't even realized I was doing it until now. I seem to be doing this a lot lately ever since I met this girl. She was going to make me go insane before graduation. I suddenly stopped on my tracks by his question when he asked. So when are you going to tell her? I turned to him slowly. Thinking it over. I knew I wanted to tell her as soon as possible. But I didn't know when the heck was the perfect moment. I didn't even know how she would react the second she found out. Will she accept me or reject me? The mere thought of her rejection after finding out I was indeed the wolf that has been following her made my stomach churn. We will never know unless we find out ourselves. In better term. He had a point there. Ugh. This was so frustrating. You want my suggestion? Ethan asked. Standing up and making his way towards me. I nodded in response as he placed a hand on my shoulder. Tell her today, after school. Everyone in the pack is anticipating the moment you tell her. They want their Luna to recognize her position in this pack. And besides, I know your wolf is probably driving you crazy right now. My wolf chuckled at that. I rolled my eyes, letting out a heavy sigh as I thought about it. So, today then? I asked, looking at him with nervous eyes. He smiled reassuringly at me and nodded. You'll be a lot happier once you do it. Man. I smiled in return. Okay. Today was the day I was going to tell her. She had to know. I don't know how she would take the news. But she had to know. I dreaded the moment I woke up this morning to go to school. The last thing I wanted was to face him. Especially early in the morning. Of all the periods I had with him, I just had to have the same homeroom as he did. I am most definitely not a morning person. So this should be interesting. The walk to school had allowed me to think things over of how I was going to face him today. I wasn't as upset as yesterday. Much to my surprise. But I didn't want to face him just yet. I actually felt embarrassed about what happened yesterday. And there was no doubt in my mind he had probably told everyone in the school. They were probably already waiting to make fun of me for my nervous breakdown. This week was just not my week. Was it? As I entered the parking lot, I was relieved to find that no one was staring at me or pointing any fingers my way. That would have been embarrassing. But unfortunately for me, I felt a pair of eyes watching my every move. Can't he just give up already? And yet, there was something in the back of my mind wishing that he wouldn't. Ignoring his stare, I walked into the building with my head held high, refusing to show any weakness towards him. If he wanted to ruin my last year in high school, two could play at that game. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me suffer. In the end, hell, be the one crying. How? I still hadn't figured it out yet. I guess I'll just wing it. I grabbed all of the supplies I needed from my locker and made my way to homeroom. I wasn't surprised to find that he still wasn't there yet. I noticed that Jared was still sitting in the seat where Marcus used to sit. I guess he'll be having a new buddy sitting next to me for today. Again. I slumped down in my chair, letting out a frustrated sigh as I proceeded to my usual mindless doodling. It was becoming a habit of mine. I found that I had begun drawing small pictures of the black wolf I've encountered in my other notebooks. I had even started drawing a large one on a sheet of paper that was stuffed somewhere in my bag. I may be a neat freak, but I never seemed to keep my backpack in order. Just then, I heard the door open and a pair of footsteps enter the room. One of them made it to the back of the class while the other sat on the seat next to me. I didn't bother looking at him. The last thing I wanted was to look into his eyes and apologize for what had happened. I was stubborn that way. But unfortunately for me, my heart skipped a beat the second I felt his presence near me. It seemed to always do that, and I hated it with such a passion right now. I gritted my teeth and tried my best to even out my breathing. If anyone would have heard me, they would think I was having a heart attack or something. Maybe I was just because of the bastard sitting next to me. Curse him and his good looks. The first half of the day proceeded smoothly. Aside from the fact that I always felt his eyes on me in homeroom and in the hallways. It was really starting to irritate me, so I was extremely happy when the sound of the lunch bell rang. I didn't even bother to get any lunch just so I could avoid his gaze on me once more. I greeted Mrs. Montgomery as usual, before making my way to the spot in the back. I sat down against the wall and pulled out my notebook where I was drawing the large picture of the black wolf. I wasn't exactly talented when it came to art, but I always found it amusing and a great pastime whenever I had nothing to do over the weekend or during the summer. I had to admit, I had gotten better over the years, but I knew I still had a lot of practice ahead of me. I turned to the page where the picture lied and tilted my head as I analyzed it. Man, I was getting good. I was surprised to find that my memory was able to obtain every detail of the wolf. Some might even say that I was drawing it based off a picture if they were to ever see it, which was highly unlikely to ever occur since no one talked to me in this school. I grabbed my pencil and continued to draw the bottom half of its body. Its face was the difficult part, but I had managed to draw it the best I could until I was left satisfied with the outcome. I continued like this for the next 10 minutes before I heard the front door of the library open. You've got to be kidding me. I glared down at the paper as I tried my best to ignore the heavy footsteps that were heading my way. They slowed down slightly, and I was surprised to see that he wasn't entering my aisle. Instead, he made his way inside the aisle beside mine and sat against the same wall I was leaning on. He didn't make a sound as he just sat there, staring down at the floor beneath him. I peered at him from the corner of my eye. Thankful I had worn my hair loose today, so it was barely noticeable that I was looking at him. Or so I thought. The second I looked at him, his eyes met mine and a small smile played at his lips. A small gasp escaped my throat before I turned back to my drawing. I glared down at it, surprised it wasn't burning beneath my heated gaze. I could still feel his eyes on me, but he never once uttered a single word. Good. I knew if I were to hear the sound of his voice, I would immediately melt inwardly at the mere sound. A moment of silence passed before his sweet, angelic voice pierced through it. Darn it. Rocky. I simply nodded in acknowledgement. I didn't dare look at him as I waited for his next words. You know I have no intention of hurting you. That is the last thing I will ever do. His words seemed to be filled with agony, and I couldn't help but look at him. His eyes mirrored the sound of his voice as he continued to stare at me. I couldn't help but feel guilty at the thought that I was the cause of this. Well, I kind of was. I did overreact yesterday anyway. Why wouldn't you ever hurt me? My voice was nothing but a whisper. I was even surprised that he had heard me at all. Because you mean too much to me already. He looked away and stared down at the ground once more, leaving me with my mouth slightly ajar. Did he really just mean what he said? No matter how hard I tried to convince myself that he was simply playing around. The way he said it would replay in my head and would instantly wash away any doubt. I stared at him for a brief moment, before looking back down at my notebook. I placed the pencil to the side as I subconsciously observed the drawing. I wasn't really paying much attention to it, but simply waiting for him to say something else to me. Thankfully, he did. I want to make it up to you. My eyes snapped back to his and I immediately refused. No. You did nothing wrong. It was completely my fault what happened yesterday, and you don't need to do anything. Yet somehow, I secretly wished he would and not listen to me. He shook his head. I don't care. Seeing you hurt yesterday just killed me inside. I want to make it up to you and show you something. I raised my eyebrow in question. Show me what?